Hey everyone, tonight we're diving deep into some of the most bizarre, disturbing, and frankly unhinged dream rituals that ancient civilizations practiced in their quest to control the mysterious world of sleep. I'm talking about cultures that built elaborate temples just for dreaming, priests who drank hallucinogenic cocktails to enter other people's nightmares, and civilizations that literally buried people alive for better dream visions. You know what's wild? We spend about a third of our lives asleep, but we still barely understand what happens during those 8 hours of unconsciousness. Ancient cultures didn't have that luxury of ignorance. They were absolutely obsessed with dreams. And they came up with some truly unhinged ways to harness whatever power they believed was hiding in our sleeping minds. Before we get started on this journey through humanity's strangest sleep experiments, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe if you genuinely enjoy these midnight explorations into the weird corners of human history. And definitely let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what ungodly hour it is in your time zone. I love seeing our global community of insomniacs checking in from everywhere. Fair warning, if you find yourself drifting off somewhere in the middle of tonight's stories, that's completely by design. Though honestly, some of these ancient dream rituals are so bizarre that they might actually keep you awake, wondering what the hell our ancestors were thinking. Tonight we're exploring how different civilizations tried to crack the code of dreams through methods that range from ingenious to absolutely terrifying. Because here's the thing about dreams, they don't just happen to you randomly. Ancient cultures understood that dreams happen through you, and they were willing to go to some pretty extreme lengths to make sure the right dreams were happening through the right people at the right times. Let's start with what might be the most elaborate dream operation in human history, the ancient Egyptian temples of Imhotep, where people would travel hundreds of miles and pay enormous sums of money just to sleep in special chambers, designed to give them prophetic dreams. And when I say elaborate, I mean these weren't just buildings with beds. These were full-service dream resorts with purification rituals, hallucinogenic preparations, and priests who claimed they could program your dreams like ancient sleep therapists with a direct line to the gods. Picture this, it's around 2000 BC in ancient Egypt, and you're dealing with some serious life crisis. Maybe you're sick with something that Egyptian medicine can't cure. Maybe you need to make an important business decision that could bankrupt your family. Or maybe you just want to know if your planned marriage is going to end in disaster. Instead of consulting a therapist, a financial advisor, or a marriage counselor, you pack your bags. Gather your life savings and head to the nearest temple of Imhotep, the god of medicine and wisdom, where you're going to pay through the nose to have what amounts to a controlled dream experience. Now, you have to understand that Egyptians took dreams more seriously than most people today. Take their medical degrees or their stock portfolios. They believed that during sleep, your soul, what they called the Ka, could literally travel to the realm of the gods and receive direct divine guidance about your earthly problems. But they also understood that not just any old dream would do, you needed the right kind of dream, in the right place with the right preparation, delivered by the right gods who specialized in your particular type of problem. The temple complex at Memphis, which was the main center for Imhotep worship, was basically ancient Egypt's equivalent of a luxury spa crossed with a psychiatric hospital, a pharmaceutical research facility, and a five-star hotel designed exclusively for wealthy people with serious problems, who were desperate enough to believe that sleeping in a special room could change their lives. When you arrived at Memphis after your journey up the Nile, which could take weeks depending on where you were coming from, you couldn't just walk in, plop down on a sacred bed, and take a nap. Oh no, that would be way too simple for a civilization that built the pyramids and figured out how to mummify people so well that we're still finding intact. But is 4,000 years later. First, you had to undergo what the Egyptians called purification of the body and soul, which was a series of rituals that would make modern detox programs look like casual weekend retreats. We're talking about ritual baths in sacred pools filled with water from specific sources that had been blessed by particular priests during particular phases of the moon. We're talking about fasting that could last up to a week, depending on your problem and your financial resources, where you would consume nothing but sacred bread, ceremonial beer, and water that had been infused with various herbs and minerals. And then there was the ritual shaving. Because apparently the gods didn't appreciate people showing up to dream meetings looking scruffy, every pilgrim had to undergo complete removal of all body hair. And I mean ALL body hair performed by specialized temple barbers using bronze razors that had been consecrated through elaborate ceremonies. The Egyptians believed that hair could interfere with the soul's ability to travel during dreams. So you had to be as smooth as a newborn baby before you were allowed anywhere near the sacred sleeping chambers. But here's where it gets really weird. The priests would conduct what amounted to ancient, psychological evaluations to determine what kind of dream experience would be most beneficial for your specific situation. They would interview you extensively about your problem, your background, your family history, your previous dreams, your dietary habits, your sexual practices, and even your relationship with your parents. These weren't casual conversations, they were detailed interrogations that could last for days, with different priests specializing in different types of problems. If you were sick, you'd be evaluated by priest-physicians who would examine your body, analyze your urine, check your pulse, and ask detailed questions about your symptoms, your medical history, and even your emotional state. If you had business problems, you'd be interviewed by priests who specialized in commercial dreams and who understood trade routes, market conditions, and the various gods who governed different types of economic activity. Based on these evaluations, the priests would prescribe a customized combination of preparations that could include specific diets designed to promote particular types of dreams, medicinal herbs that were believed to enhance dream recall and intensity, meditation exercises that would prepare your mind for divine communication, and even sexual abstinence for predetermined periods because the Egyptians believed that sexual energy could either enhance or interfere with dream reception depending on your particular spiritual condition. Some pilgrims were required to sleep on beds made from specific types of wood that had been harvested during particular seasons and treated with oils and resins that were supposed to enhance certain types of visions. Wealthy clients could request beds made from expensive imported woods like cedar from Lebanon or ebony from Nubia, while regular pilgrims got beds made from local sycamore that had been blessed but not specially treated. The actual dream chambers were architectural marvels that had been designed according to complex theories about how physical environment could influence consciousness during sleep. Different rooms had different orientations relative to the stars, because the Egyptians believed that celestial alignments could affect the quality and content of dreams. Some chambers faced east to catch the rising sun and promote dreams about new beginnings, while others faced west to capture sunset energy that was associated with death, rebirth, and transformation. The acoustics of the chambers were carefully engineered to either amplify or muffle specific types of sounds. Some rooms were designed to resonate with the sound of the Nile River, which was believed to enhance dreams about fertility and abundance, while others were acoustically isolated to create complete silence that would allow the soul to travel without distraction. Even the color schemes of the chambers were specifically chosen to promote particular types of dreams. Rooms painted with blue pigments made from lapis lazuli were used for dreams about the afterlife and communication with dead relatives, while chambers decorated with gold leaf were reserved for dreams about wealth, power, and divine favor. But the most bizarre and sophisticated aspect of Egyptian dream incubation was the use of what they called dream helpers, temple priests who would take powerful psychoactive substances and attempt to enter your dreams to provide guidance, protection, or interpretation. These priests were specialists who had undergone years of training in consciousness manipulation and who claimed they could project their awareness into other people's dream experiences. The dream helpers would consume carefully prepared combinations of blue lotus flowers, mandrake root, poppy extracts, and other hallucinogenic plants that grew along the Nile, or were imported from other parts of Africa and the Mediterranean. These substances would induce altered states of consciousness that the priests believed allowed them to access the same spiritual realms that dreamers visited during sleep. The process worked like this. After you had completed your purification rituals and been assigned to a specific dream chamber, a designated priest would consume his psychoactive preparation and then sleep in an adjacent chamber that was connected to yours through architectural features, designed to create spiritual links between the two spaces. While you were dreaming, the priest would allegedly enter your dream experience and serve as a guide, protector, or interpreter depending on what type of guidance you needed. Some dream helpers specialized in medical dreams and claimed they could diagnose illnesses by observing how diseases appeared in dream symbolism. Others focused on prophetic dreams and would allegedly help dreamers interpret symbolic visions about future events. The most skilled dream helpers claim they could actually influence the content of your dreams, steering your consciousness towards specific types of revelations or protecting you from nightmares and spiritual attacks. The Egyptians documented thousands of successful dream incubations in hieroglyphic records that read like ancient medical files combined with customer testimonials and case studies. These records were maintained by temple scribes who would interview both the dreamer and the dream helper after each session, creating detailed documentation about the preparation methods used, the content of the dreams experienced, and the practical outcomes that resulted from following dream guidance. One particularly well-documented case involved a merchant named Kedi, who came to the Memphis temple because his trading business was failing and he was facing bankruptcy. According to the temple records, Kedi had invested heavily in a caravan that was supposed to travel to Nubia to trade Egyptian goods for gold and ivory. But the caravan had disappeared somewhere in the desert and Kedi had lost everything. After 5 days of purification rituals and sleeping in a chamber that was specifically designed for commercial visions, Kedi reported a remarkably detailed dream in which Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing, appeared to him and showed him a map of trade routes through Nubia that included landmarks, water sources, and even the locations of bandit camps that posed dangers to traveling merchants. But the dream didn't just show Kedi where to go, it also revealed that his original caravan hadn't been destroyed but was trapped in a particular oasis where the guides had gotten lost and were waiting for rescue. Thoth allegedly gave Kedi specific instructions about how to organize a rescue expedition, which tribes to negotiate with for safe passage, and even which gifts to bring to ensure cooperative treatment from local authorities. When Kedi woke up, he was initially skeptical because the dream information seemed too detailed and specific to be reliable. But the dream helper priest who had been monitoring his experience confirmed that he had observed the same visions and had received additional guidance about the timing and logistics of the rescue mission. Kedi decided to follow the dream instructions exactly. He organized a rescue expedition using the route that had appeared in his dream, brought the specific gifts that Thoth had recommended, and followed the detailed guidance about negotiating with various tribal leaders along the way. According to the temple records, he found his original caravan exactly where the dream had indicated, rescued his men and merchandise, and established trading relationships with Nubian tribes that made him one of the wealthiest merchants in Egypt. But not all dream incubation experiences were pleasant or immediately helpful. The temple records also document cases where pilgrims received terrifying visions, confusing symbolic messages, or dreams that seemed to predict terrible futures. The priests had elaborate protocols for dealing with these negative experiences, including additional rituals for dream cleansing and ceremonies designed to prevent nightmare visions from manifesting in reality. One documented case involved a woman named Nefertiti, not the famous queen, just a regular person with the same name who came to the temple seeking guidance about her marriage to a man her family had arranged. Instead of receiving clear guidance about her romantic future, she experienced a series of nightmares about death, disease, and destruction that left her psychologically traumatized, and convinced that her marriage would bring disaster to her entire family. The priests responded with what they called nightmare neutralization, ceremonies that involved additional purification rituals, protective amulets, and even mock burial ceremonies designed to symbolically kill the negative dream images before they could affect her waking life. They also prescribed ongoing dream therapy that included regular visits to the temple for monitoring and additional protective rituals. The economic impact of Egyptian dream temples was absolutely enormous. Entire cities grew up around major incubation sites, with industries devoted to producing the specialized materials, foods, and services that pilgrims required. The temples employed hundreds of priests, physicians, scribes, servants, craftsmen, and security guards, creating some of the world's first tourism-based economies. The city of Memphis alone had over 200 priests dedicated to dream incubation services, plus additional staff who specialized in preparing the psychoactive substances, maintaining the specialized sleeping chambers, and providing the various support services that pilgrims needed during their stays. The temple complex included workshops for creating ceremonial objects, kitchens for preparing ritual foods, gardens for growing medicinal plants, and even libraries where priests could research the historical precedents for different types of dream problems. But the dream temples also functioned as medical centers, counseling facilities, and research institutions where Egyptian physicians and priests could study the relationship between consciousness, physical health, and spiritual well-being. They developed sophisticated theories about how dreams could be used for diagnosis, how different types of mental and physical problems could be addressed through specific types of dream experiences, and how environmental factors could be manipulated to promote healing and guidance. What's really remarkable about Egyptian dream incubation is how systematically and scientifically they approached the whole process. This wasn't just superstition or wishful thinking. They kept detailed records of thousands of cases, tracked success rates for different preparation methods, and continuously refined their techniques based on empirical observations of what worked and what didn't. The temple records show that Egyptian priests understood concepts that modern psychology is only beginning to appreciate: the relationship between expectation and experience, the importance of environmental factors in influencing consciousness, the role of suggestion and social support in therapeutic outcomes, and the complex interactions between physical health, mental state, and spiritual experience. Modern sleep researchers who study Egyptian dream incubation practices are amazed by how sophisticated their understanding of sleep psychology was. They recognized that factors like diet, exercise, social interaction, environmental stimulation, and mental preparation could all influence dream content in predictable ways. Insights that contemporary neuroscience is only beginning to validate through controlled experiments and brain imaging studies. The Egyptians also understood that successful dream therapy required ongoing support and follow-up care. Many pilgrims would return to the temples multiple times over several years, receiving additional guidance and support as they worked to implement the insights they had received through their dream experiences. The priests maintained long-term relationships with their clients and could provide continuity of care that modern medical systems often lack. But perhaps the most impressive aspect of Egyptian dream incubation was their recognition that dreams could serve multiple functions simultaneously: healing, guidance, problem-solving, spiritual development, and psychological integration. They developed comprehensive approaches to dream work that addressed the whole person rather than just focusing on specific symptoms or problems. The decline of Egyptian civilization led to the gradual abandonment of the dream incubation temples, but their influence on later cultures was enormous. Greek and Roman dream practices borrowed heavily from Egyptian techniques. Medieval Islamic dream interpretation incorporated Egyptian theoretical frameworks, and even modern psychotherapy includes concepts that can be traced back to Egyptian approaches to using dreams for healing and guidance. Contemporary researchers who study the therapeutic applications of dreams often reference Egyptian incubation practices as examples of how ancient cultures understood the healing potential of guided dream experiences. While modern approaches emphasize scientific validation and safety protocols that the Egyptians lacked, the basic principles of using environmental manipulation, psychological preparation, and social support to enhance therapeutic dreaming remain relevant for current clinical practice. The legacy of Egyptian dream temples ultimately demonstrates that human beings have always recognized the mysterious power of dreams and have consistently sought ways to harness that power for practical purposes. Whether through ancient incubation chambers or modern sleep laboratories, the quest to understand and control our dream experiences continues to be one of the most fascinating aspects of human consciousness research. When people were willing to travel hundreds of miles and spend their life savings just to sleep in a specially designed room where priests claimed they could program their dreams, You're dealing with a level of faith in the power of consciousness that suggests our ancestors understood something profound about the relationship between sleeping and waking awareness that we're still trying to rediscover today. Now let me tell you about the Maya, who took dream control to a level that would make modern lucid dreaming enthusiasts look like casual weekend. Hobbyists and contemporary military psychological operations seem like kindergarten finger painting. The Maya developed what they called Dream Warrior training, a brutal, years-long program that turned select individuals into human weapons who could supposedly attack enemies through their dreams, gather intelligence during sleep, conduct supernatural reconnaissance missions, and even assassinate targets by giving them fatal nightmares that would literally scare them to death. Picture this, it's around 800 AD in the steaming jungles of Central America, and the various Mayan city-states, places like Tikal, Palenque, Copan, and Calakmul, are locked in constant, vicious warfare over territory, trade routes, agricultural resources, and political dominance that makes modern international conflicts look like polite diplomatic disagreements. But alongside their physical armies of obsidian-wielding warriors, jaguar-skinned elite troops, and siege specialists who could reduce enemy cities to rubble, they're also training elite units of dream soldiers who fight battles in the realm of sleep, using techniques that sound like something out of a science fiction nightmare. The selection process for becoming a dream warrior was incredibly rigorous, psychologically devastating, and started in early childhood when the human mind is most malleable and susceptible to extreme conditioning. Mayan priests and military commanders would identify children, sometimes as young as 5 or 6 years old, who showed signs of natural dream recall, unusual sleep patterns, the ability to influence other people's dreams, or what the Maya called strong night souls, that could travel outside the body during sleep. But they weren't just looking for kids who had vivid dreams or talked in their sleep. The selection criteria were much more specific and disturbing. They wanted children who showed signs of psychic sensitivity, kids who seemed to know things they couldn't possibly know, who could predict events before they happened, who reported conversations with dead relatives, or who displayed unusual emotional reactions to people and places that suggested they were perceiving hidden information through supernatural means. These children would be removed from their families through elaborate ceremonies that were presented as great honors, but that effectively amounted to kidnapping sanctioned by religious and military authorities. The families were told that their children had been chosen by the gods for special service that would bring glory to their lineage and protection to their community. But in reality, most of these kids would never see their families again, and many wouldn't survive the training process. The selected children were taken to secret training facilities hidden deep in the jungle, often in natural caves that had been modified with stone chambers, underground pools, and elaborate architectural features designed to enhance consciousness manipulation and dream control. These facilities were essentially ancient versions of military black sites where child soldiers were, created through methods that would be considered torture and war crimes by any modern standard. The training itself was absolutely brutal and would probably be considered systematic child abuse by any contemporary definition. Future dream warriors underwent years of sleep deprivation designed to break down their normal consciousness patterns and make them more susceptible to altered states of awareness. They would be kept awake for days at a time through various forms of stimulation, then forced to sleep in uncomfortable positions or dangerous locations that would create intense dream experiences. But the sleep deprivation was just the beginning. The children also underwent sensory isolation that involved being confined in underground chambers for weeks at a time with minimal food, water, and human contact. This isolation was designed to force them to develop enhanced internal awareness and to make their dream lives more vivid and controllable than their waking experiences. And then there were the drugs. The Maya had access to an incredible variety of psychoactive substances derived from the rainforest environment, and they used all of them in the Dream Warrior training program. We're talking about controlled consumption of hallucinogenic substances derived from jaguar venom, which contains compounds that can induce out-of-body experiences and enhance dream recall. We're talking about toxic secretions from various species of poison, frogs that create intense alterations in consciousness and perception. The trainees also consume preparations made from psychoactive plants like morning glory seeds, which contain LSA compounds similar to LSD, various species of hallucinogenic mushrooms that grow throughout Central America, and Salvia divinorum, which creates intense but short-duration consciousness. Alterations that the Maya believed could teach people to control the transition between different states of awareness. But here's where the Mayan dream warrior training becomes truly twisted and psychologically sophisticated. They understood that to become effective dream soldiers, trainees needed to experience psychological trauma that would toughen their minds for supernatural combat and eliminate normal human empathy that might interfere with their ability to cause harm through dream manipulation. So they subjected these children to ritualized torture, mock executions, and forced participation in human sacrifice ceremonies, designed to desensitize them to violence and death while also convincing them that they had special supernatural powers that set them apart from normal human beings. The kids were forced to watch as prisoners of war were sacrificed through various gruesome methods: heart extraction, flaying, drowning in sacred pools, and slow strangulation, while being told that they would learn to inflict similar suffering on enemies through their dream abilities. The most advanced trainees were required to participate directly in these sacrifice ceremonies, performing specific roles that gradually increased their involvement in the killing process. They would start by preparing victims through ritual cleansing and drug administration, then progress to assisting with the actual executions, and finally to conducting sacrifices independently as part of their graduation requirements. But the psychological conditioning wasn't just about exposure to violence. It was also about creating a sense of supernatural identity that would allow the dream warriors to function as effective weapons without normal human moral constraints. The trainees were taught elaborate mythological frameworks that portrayed them as reincarnated gods, chosen vessels for divine power or supernatural beings who were fundamentally different from ordinary humans. They were given new names that connected them to specific Mayan deities, taught secret languages that supposedly allowed them to communicate with gods and spirits, and required to undergo body modifications like scarification, tattooing, and dental filing that marked them as members of an elite supernatural caste that existed outside normal human society. The most advanced dream warriors claimed they could project their consciousness into other people's dreams and manipulate the dream content to cause psychological damage, extract military intelligence, or even trigger physical symptoms that could lead to illness or death in the waking world. The training for these abilities involved years of practice with lucid dreaming techniques, out-of-body experiences, and what the Maya called soul travel to specific locations in the physical world. But these weren't just visualization exercises or meditation practices. The Maya developed systematic methods for testing and validating dream warrior abilities through controlled experiments that would have impressed modern military intelligence operations. Trainees would be required to gather specific information about distant locations, enemy activities, or hidden objects through their dream travels, and their reports would be verified through conventional reconnaissance to determine the accuracy of their supernatural intelligence gathering. Successful dream warriors learned to construct elaborate mental landscapes called dream cities, where they could retreat during sleep to plan operations, communicate with other warriors, and store intelligence gathered from enemy dreams. These mental constructions were supposedly so detailed and persistent that multiple warriors could visit the same dream locations and share information through shared consciousness experiences. The dream cities weren't just abstract mental spaces. They were precise replicas of real Mayan urban environments complete with temples, palaces, ball courts, and defensive fortifications that served as bases of operations for supernatural military campaigns. Advanced warriors could allegedly meet in these dream locations to coordinate attacks, share intelligence, and plan complex operations that would be carried out simultaneously in multiple enemy territories. Mayan military leaders would deploy dream warriors before major battles to conduct reconnaissance missions through the dreams of enemy commanders, gathering detailed information about military plans, troop positions, supply situations, and strategic weaknesses by exploring their subconscious minds while they slept. These supernatural intelligence operations supposedly provided crucial advantages in conventional warfare by revealing enemy intentions and capabilities that couldn't be discovered through normal spying methods. One of the most detailed accounts of dream warfare comes from Spanish colonial records, describing a prolonged conflict between the major cities of Tikal and Calacual during the late Classic period. According to these documents, which were based on interviews with surviving Mayan informants, Tikal's dream warriors conducted a months-long campaign of nightmare attacks against Calakmal's leadership that allegedly caused several enemy commanders to suffer nervous breakdowns and refuse to participate in planned military operations. The dream attacks reportedly involved projecting terrifying visions into the minds of enemy leaders while they slept, creating recurring nightmares about military defeat, divine punishment, and personal destruction that would gradually erode their psychological resilience and decision-making capabilities. The nightmare campaigns were supposedly so effective that some Calakmal commanders abandoned their positions and fled into the jungle rather than continue facing supernatural psychological warfare. But the dream warriors were also used for more direct assassination purposes through a technique they called death dreaming that involved inducing specific types of fatal nightmares in targeted individuals. According to Mayan beliefs, if a skilled dream warrior could create the right combination of terror, shock, and psychological trauma in a target's dream experience, they could cause the person to die of fear during sleep without any apparent physical cause. The death dreaming process required extensive preparation and precise timing. The dream warrior would spend weeks studying the target's personal history, psychological vulnerabilities, and cultural fears to design a nightmare experience that would be specifically tailored to cause maximum psychological trauma. They would then use various supernatural techniques to project this carefully crafted vision into the target's consciousness during the most vulnerable stages of sleep. Spanish chroniclers recorded multiple cases where political enemies of Mayan rulers died suddenly in their sleep with no apparent physical cause, often after reporting terrifying dreams about divine punishment or supernatural retribution. While these deaths could have resulted from various natural causes, the consistency of the reports and the specific political contexts suggests that some form of systematic psychological warfare might have been involved. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Mayan dream warfare was their practice of soul capture, LLEGEDLY, trapping enemy souls within specially prepared dream objects like obsidian mirrors, jade sculptures, carved bone amulets, or elaborate featherwork constructions that had been consecrated through human sacrifice and supernatural rituals. The soul capture process involved identifying enemy leaders, whose psychological influence was crucial to their military effectiveness, then using dream manipulation techniques to lure their souls into specially prepared objects during sleep. According to Mayan beliefs, if they could capture someone's dream essence in a physical object, they could control that person's behavior in the waking world, force them to make strategic mistakes, or even compel them to betray their own military forces. The captured souls were allegedly stored in secret chambers beneath Mayan temples, where they could be interrogated for intelligence, tortured for information about enemy plans, or used as supernatural hostages to influence the behavior of enemy commanders. The most powerful dream objects supposedly contained the souls of multiple enemies and could be used to coordinate complex psychological operations across entire enemy territories. The training facilities for dream warriors included chambers designed to amplify hallucinogenic experiences through acoustic resonance, architectural features that enhance the effects of psychoactive substances, and underground caves with specific mineral compositions that supposedly created electromagnetic fields beneficial for consciousness manipulation. The most important training sites were located in natural, cenotes, water-filled sinkholes that the Maya considered sacred portals to the underworld, where advanced students would practice underwater dreaming techniques that involved controlled drowning experiences designed to simulate death and enhance their ability to travel between different realms of consciousness. These underwater training sessions were incredibly dangerous and many students died during the process, but survivors claim that near-death experiences in sacred waters gave them enhanced, supernatural abilities, and direct access to the knowledge of deceased dream warriors who had mastered the most advanced techniques before their own deaths. The dream warriors also developed countermeasures against supernatural attacks from enemy practitioners, including protective amulets carved from specific types of jade that supposedly deflected nightmare intrusions, architectural features in sleeping chambers that could shield the mind from hostile dream manipulation, and ritual ceremonies performed before sleep to create spiritual barriers against enemy consciousness projection. Mayan cities would employ teams of defensive dream warriors, whose job was to patrol the sleep of important political and military leaders, protecting them from enemy nightmare attacks and providing early warning about supernatural reconnaissance operations. These defensive specialists would sleep in chambers adjacent to their charges and maintain constant vigilance against intrusions from hostile dream warriors. The most elite defensive practitioners claimed they could create dream fortresses, elaborate psychological constructions that would protect entire communities from supernatural attack by establishing spiritual barriers around their territories and alerting defenders to any attempts at dream manipulation or soul capture by enemy forces. Spanish conquistadors were initially baffled by reports of dream warfare and dismissed them as primitive superstition or deliberate deception by indigenous informants trying to exaggerate their military capabilities. But some colonial documents suggest that Spanish military leaders began experiencing unusual nightmares and psychological problems during their campaigns against Mayan cities, leading some historians to speculate that dream warrior techniques might have been more effective against European invaders than conventional military resistance. Several Spanish commanders reported recurring nightmares about being sacrificed in Mayan temples, dreams about their expeditions failing catastrophically, and visions of divine punishment for their invasion of indigenous territories. While these psychological problems could have resulted from the stress of operating in an unfamiliar and dangerous environment, some Spanish accounts describe dream experiences that were remarkably consistent with reported Mayan nightmare projection techniques. The decline of Mayan civilization during the Classic period collapse led to the gradual abandonment of dream warrior training programs. But some traditional Mayan communities in Guatemala, Belize, and southern Mexico claim that knowledge of these techniques was preserved through secret oral traditions that continue to this day. Contemporary Mayan shamans and spiritual practitioners occasionally reference dream warrior traditions in their healing and protective ceremonies, though the extreme military applications of these techniques have been largely abandoned in favor of using consciousness manipulation for therapeutic and spiritual purposes rather than supernatural warfare. Modern researchers who study Mayan dream practices are divided about the effectiveness of their consciousness manipulation techniques. Skeptics argue that dream warfare was primarily psychological intimidation, combined with conventional intelligence gathering and political assassination disguised as supernatural activity. But other scholars point to the sophistication of Mayan understanding of consciousness, their detailed knowledge of psychoactive substances, and their systematic approaches to mental conditioning as evidence that they might have developed genuine techniques for influencing human psychology through dream manipulation that exceeded what conventional warfare could achieve. The archaeological record includes evidence of the specialized facilities, ritual objects, and ceremonial practices associated with dream warrior training, suggesting that these programs were real institutions rather than just mythological stories or Spanish colonial fantasies about indigenous supernatural beliefs. Contemporary research into lucid dreaming, consciousness manipulation, and the psychological effects of psychoactive substances has provided new frameworks for understanding how some of the techniques described in Mayan dream warrior accounts might actually work through natural psychological and neurological processes rather than supernatural mechanisms. But regardless of their ultimate effectiveness, the Mayan dream warrior programs represent one of the most systematic and sophisticated attempts in human history to weaponize consciousness and use sleep as a battlefield for conducting military operations that could influence the outcomes of conventional warfare through supernatural psychological manipulation. When ancient civilizations were training child soldiers to fight battles in the realm of dreams using techniques that sound like military science fiction, You're dealing with a level of commitment to consciousness warfare that suggests our ancestors understood something profound about the relationship between individual psychology and collective military power that modern military psychology is only beginning to investigate through programs that remain classified to this day. Let me tell you about one of the most legally bizarre and psychologically twisted practices in Roman history, the Somnia tribunals, where Roman courts would actually prosecute people for crimes they committed in other people's dreams. Yes, you heard that right, the Romans, who gave us modern legal systems, concrete architecture, and the concept of innocent until proven guilty, also had legal proceedings where you could be fined, imprisoned, exiled, or even executed for murder, theft, adultery, or treason that happened entirely in someone else's nightmare, while you were peacefully sleeping in your own bed several miles away. Picture this. It's around 150 AD during the reign of Emperor Antoninus Pius, and Roman society has become absolutely obsessed with dream interpretation to a degree that would make modern social media addiction look like casual weekend browsing. Every wealthy household employs professional dream readers who analyze the family's nocturnal visions for omens about business ventures, political opportunities, and potential dangers. The government maintains official records of prophetic dreams reported by citizens and uses them to guide policy decisions. And the legal system has developed an entire category of jurisprudence around dream-related offenses that operates parallel to conventional criminal law. Now, you have to understand that Romans weren't just superstitious primitives who believed in random magical nonsense. These were the people who built aqueducts that still work today, developed military strategies that are still taught in modern war colleges, and created legal principles that form the foundation of contemporary international law. But they also believed that dreams were not just random mental activity or psychological projections. They were actual experiences that took place in a parallel spiritual realm where actions had real consequences for both the dreamer and the people who appeared in their dreams. The Somnia tribunals emerged from the Roman legal principle of somnium verum, the doctrine that dream experiences could constitute genuine interactions between souls that carried the same moral and legal weight as physical actions in the waking world. According to this theory, if someone appeared in your dream and committed a crime against you, that person's soul had actually projected itself into your consciousness and performed a real action that deserved real punishment. But here's where Roman dream law gets really twisted and legalistic in ways that would make modern bureaucracy look straightforward. The Romans didn't just accept any dream accusation at face value, they developed incredibly complex legal procedures for determining the validity of dream crimes, the intent of the accused, and the appropriate punishments for different types of supernatural offenses. According to Roman dream jurisprudence, if someone appeared in your dream and committed a crime against you, even if that person was completely innocent in waking life and had no knowledge of your dream experience, you could file formal charges against them in a special court system designed specifically for adjudicating dream offenses. But the process was so complicated and expensive that only wealthy Romans could afford to pursue dream crime prosecutions. The legal process was absolutely bonkers but taken completely seriously by Roman authorities, who had developed elaborate theoretical frameworks for understanding the metaphysical implications of dream experiences. The accuser would file a formal complaint called a somnium accusatio, describing the dream crime in excruciating detail, including the date and time of the dream, the specific location where the dream events occurred, the names of any witnesses who appeared in the dream, and a detailed description of the damages suffered as a result of the dream experience. But you couldn't just walk into court and say, "Marcus appeared in my dream and stole my money, so I want him arrested." The Roman legal system required corroborating evidence that the dream experience was genuine rather than fabricated, that the accused person had some connection to the dreamer that would make dream projection possible, and that the dream events were consistent with known principles of supernatural jurisprudence. The accused person would then be required to appear before a panel of judges who specialized in dream law and were trained in complex theological and philosophical principles about the nature of dream reality, the mechanics of soul projection, and the legal implications of supernatural crime. These judges, called somnium iodices, underwent years of specialized education in both conventional Roman law and esoteric theories about consciousness and spiritual interaction. The judges would hear testimony from both the accuser and the accused, examine physical evidence that might support or contradict the dream accusations, and consult with professional dream interpreters who could provide expert analysis of the reported dream content. The trials could last for weeks or months, with detailed examination of every aspect of the alleged dream crime and extensive debate about its legal implications. But here's where Roman dream law becomes truly sophisticated and disturbing. The Romans developed elaborate legal procedures for determining whether dream crimes were intentional or accidental, premeditated or spontaneous, and whether they resulted from malicious supernatural manipulation or innocent psychological projection. They distinguished between malicious dream projection, maleficus somnium proiectio, deliberately appearing in someone's dream to cause harm, and innocent dream intrusion, innocent somnium intrusio, accidentally appearing in someone's dream without harmful intent. Malicious dream projection was considered one of the most serious crimes in Roman law, punishable by heavy fines, exile, or even death, depending on the severity of the dream offense. The Romans believed that people with strong wills, extensive magical training, or naturally powerful souls could deliberately infiltrate other people's dreams to commit crimes that would cause psychological damage in the waking world while avoiding the physical risks associated with conventional criminal activity. These supernatural criminals could allegedly steal money, seduce married women, or even commit murder through dream manipulation without ever leaving their own bedrooms. But proving malicious dream projection required demonstrating that the accused had both the supernatural ability and the criminal intent, necessary to commit dream crimes deliberately. Roman prosecutors would investigate the accused person's background, looking for evidence of magical training, consultation with dream manipulation specialists, or previous accusations of supernatural criminal activity. One of the most famous and well-documented Somnia tribunal cases involved a senator named Marcus Aurelius Corvus, who was accused of committing dream murder against his political rival, Gaius Fabius Maximus, during a heated dispute over proposed legislation regarding grain distribution to the urban poor. This case became legendary in Roman legal history because it established important precedents for evaluating dream, crime evidence, and determining supernatural criminal liability. According to the court records, which were preserved in the Roman state archives and later copied by medieval scholars, Maximus reported a vivid dream in which Corvus appeared in his bedroom during the night and stabbed him, repeatedly with a ceremonial dagger, while delivering a passionate speech about political reform and the need to eliminate corrupt senators who opposed progressive policies. The dream was so realistic and traumatic that Maximus woke up with physical pain in his chest, where he had been stabbed in the dream, and he found bloodstains on his sleeping tunic that couldn't be explained through conventional means. He also reported that during the dream attack, Corvus had revealed specific details about Maximus's private financial dealings and family secrets that were not publicly known, suggesting that the dream encounter involved genuine supernatural intelligence, gathering rather than just psychological projection. The prosecution, led by a famous advocate named Lucius Antonius Prosecutor, seriously, that was his actual name, argued that Corvus had used magical techniques to project his consciousness into Maximus's dream and commit symbolic murder as a form of political intimidation, designed to force his opponent to withdraw from the legislative debate. They presented evidence that Corvus had recently consulted with Egyptian dream magicians who were known to practice consciousness projection techniques, and that he had purchased special amulets and ritual implements designed to enhance dream manipulation abilities. The prosecution also called witnesses who testified that Corvus had made threatening statements about Maximus during public debates, that he had been observed performing strange rituals in his private villa, and that several other senators had reported having disturbing dreams about Corvus during the same time period when the alleged dream murder occurred. But Corvus's defense team, led by the brilliant advocate Gaius Fabius Defender, Roman naming conventions were apparently not very creative, argued that he couldn't be held responsible for Maximus's psychological projections, and that appearing in someone else's dream was not proof of intentional magical interference. They claimed that Maximus was using the dream accusation to eliminate a political opponent through legal manipulation rather than honest debate about policy issues. The defense presented counter-evidence suggesting that Maximus had a history of psychological instability, that he had consulted with dream interpretation specialists who might have influenced his perception of the dream experience, and that the supposed supernatural elements of the dream could be explained through conventional psychological mechanisms rather than magical intervention. They also argued that the Roman legal system shouldn't prosecute people for crimes that occurred in private mental experiences that couldn't be independently verified, and that accepting dream accusations as valid evidence would create dangerous precedents that could be used to persecute innocent citizens, based on the fantasies and delusions of their political enemies. The trial lasted for 6 months and included testimony from professional dream interpreters, philosophers who specialized in consciousness theory, Egyptian magical consultants, physicians who examined Maximus for evidence of supernatural attack, and even other senators who claimed to have had similar dreams involving Corvus during the relevant time period. The proceedings became so complex and technically sophisticated that special transcribers were assigned to document every detail of the testimony and legal arguments, creating one of the most comprehensive records of ancient supernatural jurisprudence that has survived to the present day. The court ultimately found Corvus guilty of malicious dream projection in the 3rd degree. Romans had detailed classifications for different types of supernatural crimes and sentenced him to exile from Rome for 5 years, confiscation of his property to compensate Maximus for his dream trauma, and permanent prohibition from participating in Roman political life. But the Somnia tribunals weren't just used for high-profile political persecution. They also handled thousands of cases involving ordinary Romans who accused each other of dream theft, stealing objects that appeared in dreams, dream adultery, extramarital affairs that occurred in dream states, dream assault, physical violence that took place during dream experiences, and dream blasphemy, insulting gods or emperors in dreams witnessed by other dreamers. Dream theft cases were particularly common because Romans believed that objects acquired during dream experiences could be transferred to the physical world through proper magical procedures, meaning that someone who stole your dream possessions was actually committing real theft that deprived you of potential material wealth. Dream adultery prosecutions were especially scandalous because they allowed married Romans to accuse their spouses of infidelity based solely on dream evidence, even if no physical adultery had occurred in the waking world. These cases often involved elaborate investigations into the dream lives of both spouses, with professional dream monitors hired to observe and document their nocturnal experiences. The Romans developed sophisticated legal theories about dream evidence, including detailed rules about which types of dreams could be admitted in court, how dream testimony should be corroborated through independent sources, and whether dreams experienced under the influence of alcohol, drugs, or extreme emotional distress could be considered legally valid. They also created complex classification systems for different types of dream crimes, with varying penalties depending on the severity of the supernatural offense, the social status of the victim and perpetrator, and the potential consequences of the dream crime for Roman society and political stability. Professional dream witnesses became a recognized and lucrative occupation in Roman society. Individuals who trained themselves to remember dreams in precise detail and could provide expert testimony about dream events in court proceedings. These witnesses underwent rigorous training in memory techniques, dream interpretation, and legal procedures, and they were certified by official Roman dream academies that operated under imperial oversight. The most successful dream witnesses could earn substantial fees for their services and were regularly consulted by wealthy Romans who wanted to document their dream experiences for potential legal use or who needed expert analysis of suspicious dreams that might indicate supernatural attack by their enemies. But the most bizarre and psychologically disturbing aspect of Roman dream law was their practice of reciprocal dream punishment, somnium pona reciproca, where convicted dream criminals could be sentenced to experience specific nightmares as legal retribution for their supernatural offenses. Court-appointed dream magistrates, who were specialists in consciousness, manipulation, and psychological torture, would use magical techniques to induce particular types of traumatic dreams in convicted criminals as a form of supernatural punishment that was believed to be more effective than physical penalties for deterring future dream crimes. The reciprocal punishment process involved detailed consultation between judges, dream specialists, and the victims of dream crimes to design nightmare experiences that would be specifically tailored to cause maximum psychological impact while also providing symbolic justice for the original supernatural offense. Convicted dream murderers might be sentenced to experience recurring nightmares about being killed in the same manner they had used against their victims, while dream thieves could be punished with dreams about losing all their possessions through supernatural theft by invisible criminals who couldn't be caught or prosecuted. The Roman legal system maintained detailed records of reciprocal dream punishments, tracking their effectiveness as deterrents and refining the techniques used to ensure that the induced nightmares achieved their intended psychological and legal objectives without causing permanent mental damage that would interfere with the criminal's ability to function as a productive member of Roman society. Roman legal scholars wrote extensive treatises on dream jurisprudence that influenced legal thinking throughout the empire and even affected early Christian canon law as the Church grappled with questions about the spiritual and moral implications of dream experiences and their relationship to conventional religious and ethical frameworks. The most famous legal text on dream crime was De Somnium Criminibus on Dream Crimes by the jurist Marcus Fabius Theoreticus, which provided comprehensive analysis of supernatural criminal law and established legal precedents that were cited in Roman courts for over 2 centuries. But the Somnia tribunals also created serious problems for Roman society, including false accusations motivated by political rivalry, extortion schemes based on fabricated dream crimes, and social paranoia about supernatural attack that disrupted normal commercial and social relationships between Roman citizens. The system became so complex and expensive that wealthy Romans could essentially weaponize dream accusations against their enemies, while poor citizens had no effective legal recourse when they were accused of dream crimes they couldn't afford to defend against in court. The economic impact of dream litigation became so significant that Rome developed a specialized insurance industry where wealthy citizens could purchase protection against dream-related legal claims. These policies would cover legal fees, fines, and damages resulting from dream crime accusations, essentially creating the world's first supernatural litigation insurance industry. Professional dream protection services also emerged, offering wealthy Romans ongoing monitoring and defensive measures against supernatural attack. These services employed teams of dream guards, who would sleep in shifts to patrol their clients' dream experiences and provide early warning about hostile dream intrusions or potential legal accusations. The Somnia tribunals were finally abolished in the late 4th century AD when Emperor Constantine converted to Christianity and Roman law began shifting away from pagan beliefs about dream reality and supernatural criminal liability. Christian theology emphasized the distinction between spiritual and physical reality in ways that made dream crime prosecutions theologically problematic. But the legal precedents established by dream courts influenced medieval European attitudes towards supernatural crime. The legal status of mental experiences and the relationship between individual consciousness and collective social responsibility in ways that persisted for centuries after the fall of the Roman Empire. Some historians argue that Roman dream law represented an early attempt to address the psychological dimensions of criminal behavior and the social impact of mental experiences that wouldn't be fully developed again until the emergence of modern psychiatric and psychological approaches to criminal justice. Others view the Somnia tribunals as evidence of the dangers inherent in legal systems that blur the boundaries between objective reality and subjective experience, creating opportunities for political manipulation and social persecution that could destroy innocent lives based on unprovable supernatural accusations. But regardless of their ultimate value or effectiveness, The Roman dream courts represent one of the most systematic and legally sophisticated attempts in human history to create judicial frameworks for addressing the social implications of unconscious psychological experiences and their potential impact on community, welfare, and individual rights. When ancient Romans were willing to execute people for crimes they committed in other people's dreams, you're dealing with a legal system that took the reality of consciousness seriously enough to treat mental experiences as having genuine moral and social consequences that deserved the same attention and punishment as physical criminal actions. Now let's talk about the Norse, who developed what might be the most hardcore and psychologically extreme dream magic system in human history. Cider rituals that involve shamanic practitioners literally dying and being resurrected to gain access to prophetic dreams, communicate with the spirits of the dead, and travel between the 9 realms of Norse cosmology. And when I say dying, I don't mean symbolically or metaphorically. These Vikings were temporarily stopping their hearts and breathing, inducing clinical death, and then being revived to achieve deeper dream states that would make modern extreme sports look like children's playground activities. Picture this: it's around 900 AD in the harsh, unforgiving landscapes of Scandinavia, where Norse society is facing constant uncertainty from brutal warfare, devastating winters that could last for months, unpredictable crop failures, and the inherent dangers of Viking raids that could either make you incredibly wealthy or leave you dead in some foreign land with ravens picking at your bones. To navigate these challenges and gain supernatural advantages over their enemies, the Norse developed a form of magic called cider that combines shamanic practices, consciousness manipulation, gender-bending spiritual techniques, and what can only be described as controlled near-death experiences that pushed human endurance to its absolute limits. Now, you have to understand that cider wasn't just some casual folk magic or simple fortune-telling practice that anyone could pick up on weekends. This was serious, dangerous, life-threatening spiritual technology that required years of training, extraordinary psychological resilience, and a willingness to literally risk your life every time you performed the rituals. The Norse treated cider practitioners with a mixture of deep respect and profound fear, recognizing that these individuals had access to supernatural powers that could determine the outcome of battles, predict future events, and manipulate the fundamental forces that governed fate itself. Cider practitioners, known as vivlur if they were women or Cymen if they were men, were essentially Norse society's equivalent of special forces operatives crossed with nuclear physicists and psychiatric researchers. Except instead of using conventional weapons or scientific instruments, they used their own consciousness as a tool for accessing hidden information and influencing reality through supernatural means. But here's where Norse gender dynamics made cider practice incredibly complicated and socially controversial, the most powerful and respected cider. Techniques were traditionally associated with feminine spirituality and were considered unmanly for male practitioners. Men who engaged in cider were often accused of ergi, a Norse concept that implied unmanliness, femininity, and sexual deviance that could seriously damage a man's reputation and social standing in warrior culture. This gender controversy created a fascinating psychological dynamic where some of the most powerful spiritual techniques in Norse society were simultaneously revered for their effectiveness and stigmatized for their association with feminine consciousness. Male cider practitioners often had to overcome enormous social pressure and personal shame to pursue training that could give them supernatural abilities but might also mark them as sexually and socially deviant. The training process for cider practice began in childhood or adolescence and involved gradually increasing exposure to extreme physical and psychological conditions that would prepare practitioners for the dangerous consciousness alterations that advanced techniques required. Trainees learned to survive in Arctic conditions that would kill normal people, being buried in snow for extended periods, suspended underwater until they lost consciousness, and subjected to ritualized torture designed to separate their souls from their bodies. But the physical conditioning was just preparation for the real challenge of cider practice, learning to control the transition between life and death, consciousness and unconsciousness, physical reality and spiritual dimensions. Advanced practitioners developed techniques for inducing states that were clinically indistinguishable from death while maintaining enough awareness to navigate the supernatural realms they encountered during these experiences. The most extreme and dangerous cider technique was called death riding, though the Norse used various terms for these practices that don't translate directly into modern languages. This involved using controlled asphyxiation, hypothermia, blood loss, or poisoning to temporarily stop the practitioner's vital signs and enter a state where their soul could allegedly travel through the 9 realms of Norse cosmology while their body remained in a death-like trance. The death riding process was incredibly dangerous and required the assistance of other practitioners who would monitor the Vavlur's physical condition and determine the optimal moment to revive them before permanent death occurred. These assistants had to be experts in recognizing the subtle signs that distinguished reversible death from irreversible dying, and they used techniques passed down through generations of cider practitioners to bring Vavlur back from the edge of permanent oblivion. The typical death riding ritual would begin with extensive preparation that could last for days or weeks. The Vavlur would undergo purification ceremonies, consume specific combinations of herbs and psychoactive substances that would enhance their spiritual sensitivity, and perform elaborate rituals designed to strengthen their soul's connection to their body so they could find their way back from whatever supernatural realms they visited during their death experience. The actual death induction would often take place in specially prepared locations that had particular spiritual significance: sacred groves, ancient burial mounds, natural caves, or coastal areas where the boundary between the physical and spiritual worlds was believed to be thinner. The Vavlur would typically be placed in an underground chamber or burial site, often completely naked and sometimes bound with ropes to prevent unconscious movement that might interfere with the spiritual journey. During the death riding experience, Vavlur reported encountering specific Norse deities like Odin, who was himself a practitioner of cider, Freya, who supposedly taught cider techniques to the gods, and Hel, the goddess of death who ruled over the realm of the dead. These divine encounters allegedly provided practitioners with information about upcoming battles, weather patterns, political developments, and the fates of individual Vikings that could be crucial for community survival and military success. But death riding wasn't just about receiving prophetic information. Vavlur also claimed they could actively influence events during their spiritual journeys. They could allegedly visit distant locations to gather intelligence about enemy activities, travel to the realm of the dead to communicate with deceased warriors who could provide strategic advice, and even manipulate the fundamental forces of fate that determine the outcomes of human endeavors. One of the most detailed accounts of cider death riding comes from the saga of Eric the Red, which describes a Vavlur named Horbjörg, who was consulted during a severe famine that was threatening the survival of the Norse settlement in Greenland. According to the saga, the colonists were facing starvation because unusual weather patterns had disrupted their hunting and farming activities, and conventional survival strategies weren't providing enough food to sustain the community through the winter. Horbjörg was invited to perform a death riding ritual to determine the supernatural causes of the famine and to seek divine guidance about how the community could restore the natural balance that would allow normal weather patterns to return. The saga provides remarkable detail about the preparation and execution of this ritual, offering one of the most comprehensive accounts of cider practice that has survived in the historical record. The preparation for Horbjörg's death riding began with the construction of a special platform, called a seoler, a raised structure that was believed to enhance the practitioner's ability to access altered states of consciousness and communicate with supernatural forces. The platform was built according to specific traditional requirements and decorated with symbolic objects that had spiritual significance for the particular type of guidance being sought. Horbjörg underwent 3 days of fasting and purification rituals that gradually weakened her physical condition while heightening her spiritual sensitivity. She consumed preparations made from various psychoactive plants and fungi that grew in the Arctic environment, including substances that modern researchers believe contained compounds similar to those found in hallucinogenic mushrooms and other consciousness-altering natural drugs. The actual death-riding ceremony took place during the darkest part of winter, when the boundary between day and night, life and death, was most ambiguous. Horbjörg was placed in an underground chamber that had been specially prepared with symbols and objects associated with the Norse underworld, and her assistants used controlled strangulation techniques to gradually reduce her breathing and heart rate until she entered a state that appeared to be clinical death. According to the saga, Horbjörg's spirit traveled to the realm of the frost giants, the supernatural beings who were believed to control winter weather and who had apparently decided to punish the human settlers for some violation of cosmic law. During her spiritual journey, she negotiated with these powerful entities, learning what specific offerings and ceremonies would be required to restore their favor and convince them to release their grip on the weather patterns that were causing the famine. When Horbjörg was revived after 3 days of death-like trance, she provided detailed instructions about which animals should be sacrificed when the ceremonies should be performed, where the rituals should be conducted, and even what specific words should be spoken during the offerings to ensure that the frost giants would accept the community's apology and restore normal weather conditions. The saga reports that the community followed Horbjörg's instructions exactly, performing the required ceremonies with meticulous attention to every detail she had specified. According to the account, the famine ended within weeks as weather conditions improved dramatically. Hunting became more successful, and the settlement was able to survive what had seemed like certain death from starvation. But cider death riding wasn't just used for community crises like famines or plagues. Vavlur also conducted these dangerous rituals for military intelligence gathering, personal guidance, and what amounted to supernatural espionage operations. They would allegedly send their spirits to enemy settlements to observe military preparations, assess the strength and morale of opposing forces, and even attempt to influence the dreams and decision-making processes of enemy leaders. Norse military commanders regularly consulted Vavlur before major raids or battles, seeking information about optimal timing, likely resistance, potential dangers, and strategic opportunities that couldn't be discovered through conventional reconnaissance. Some saga accounts describe Vavlur providing incredibly detailed intelligence about enemy fortifications, troop movements, supply situations, and even the personal habits and psychological vulnerabilities of opposing leaders, information that would have been impossible to obtain through normal spying methods. The military applications of cider death riding created some of the most dramatic and politically significant examples of Norse supernatural warfare. Vavlur were allegedly used to conduct psychological operations against enemy communities, inducing nightmares and psychological disturbances in enemy leaders, disrupting enemy morale through supernatural intimidation, and even attempting to influence the outcomes of battles through manipulation of fate and divine favor. But perhaps the most disturbing and controversial aspect of cider practice was nightmare sending, a technique where Vavlur would use death riding to enter the dreams of enemies and induce terrifying visions designed to cause psychological breakdown, physical illness, or even death from supernatural terror. This was considered one of the most powerful and dangerous forms of Norse magic, and it was used primarily against political enemies and military opponents who posed serious threats to Norse communities. The nightmare-sending process required Vavlur to identify specific individuals whose psychological destruction would benefit their community or patron, then use death-riding techniques to project their consciousness into the target's dream, experiences during the most vulnerable stages of sleep. The Vavlur would craft elaborate nightmare scenarios designed to exploit the target's personal fears, cultural anxieties, and psychological weaknesses in ways that would cause maximum psychological trauma. Saga accounts describe cases where enemy leaders were allegedly driven to madness, suicide, or fatal illness through sustained nightmare campaigns conducted by skilled Vavlur, who had mastered the most advanced death-riding techniques. While these accounts might reflect propaganda or wishful thinking rather than actual supernatural effectiveness, they demonstrate the psychological warfare capabilities that Norse society attributed to their most accomplished cider practitioners. Cider practitioners also claimed they could use death riding to retrieve the souls of people who were dying or had recently died, essentially conducting supernatural medical interventions that could save lives through spiritual rather than physical means. Some saga accounts describe Vavlur traveling to Hel, the Norse underworld, to negotiate with the goddess of death for the return of souls who had died prematurely or under circumstances that violated cosmic justice. These soul retrieval missions were incredibly dangerous because they required Vavlur to enter the realm of the dead and convince Hel to release souls that were rightfully hers according to Norse cosmic law. The negotiations allegedly involved complex bargaining where the Vavlur would offer alternative compensation, perform services for the death goddess, or demonstrate that the premature death violated divine justice in ways that required supernatural correction. But the physical and psychological toll of cider death riding was enormous and cumulative. Most Vavlur showed signs of chronic health problems from repeated near-death experiences, including memory loss, neurological damage, respiratory problems, and significantly shortened lifespans. Many practitioners died during training or from complications related to their extreme consciousness manipulation techniques. The repeated exposure to clinical death also created psychological changes that made Vavlur increasingly detached from normal human concerns and relationships. Many practitioners became socially isolated, emotionally distant, and obsessed with supernatural matters in ways that made it difficult for them to maintain normal family and community relationships. Norse society had complex and ambivalent attitudes towards cider practitioners. They were simultaneously revered for their supernatural abilities and feared for their dangerous knowledge and association with death. Many Vavlur lived as social outcasts who were consulted when their services were desperately needed, but otherwise avoided, because of their disturbing presence and their connection to forces that most people preferred not to think about. The training facilities for death riding included specially prepared underground chambers, natural caves with specific acoustic and atmospheric properties, sacred groves where the boundary between life and death was believed to be permeable, and coastal locations where practitioners could combine controlled drowning with other consciousness-altering techniques. The most important and dangerous training sites were located in natural cenotes and underground, springs where Vavlur could practice underwater death riding, a technique that involved controlled drowning in sacred waters that were believed to have direct connections to the Norse underworld. These underwater sessions were incredibly risky, and many students died during the process, but survivors claimed that near-death experiences in sacred waters gave them enhanced supernatural abilities and direct access to the knowledge of deceased Vavlur who had mastered the most advanced techniques. The Vavlur also developed countermeasures and protective techniques against supernatural attacks from enemy practitioners, including specialized amulets carved from whalebone and walrus ivory that supposedly deflected nightmare intrusions, architectural features in sleeping chambers that could shield the mind from hostile death riding, and ritual ceremonies performed before sleep to create spiritual barriers against enemy consciousness projection. Norse communities would employ defensive Vavlur, whose primary responsibility was to protect important political and military leaders from supernatural attack by enemy practitioners. These defensive specialists would sleep in chambers adjacent to their charges and maintain constant spiritual vigilance against intrusions from hostile death riders who might attempt to gather intelligence or cause psychological damage through dream manipulation. The most skilled defensive practitioners claimed they could create death barriers, elaborate spiritual constructions that would protect entire communities from supernatural attack by establishing metaphysical fortifications around their territories and providing early warning about any attempts at death riding or nightmare sending by enemy Vavlur. The Christianization of Scandinavia led to the systematic persecution of cider practitioners, who were viewed by Christian authorities as witches, devil worshippers, and practitioners of demonic magic that threatened the spiritual welfare of newly converted Christian communities. Many Vavlur were executed, their training facilities were destroyed, and knowledge of death riding techniques was gradually lost as Norse pagan traditions were suppressed and replaced by Christian religious practices. However, some modern Reconstructionist groups and contemporary pagan movements claim to have recovered cider techniques through archaeological research. analysis of surviving saga accounts, and experimentation with consciousness-altering practices that attempt to recreate the essential elements of Norse death riding without the extreme physical dangers that characterize the original techniques. Contemporary practitioners generally avoid the most dangerous aspects of traditional cider, particularly the clinical death induction and extreme physical conditioning, in favor of safer approaches that use meditation, sensory deprivation, and mild psychoactive substances to achieve altered states of consciousness that can provide therapeutic and spiritual benefits without risking permanent injury or death. But modern research into the neuroscience of consciousness, near-death experiences, and the effects of extreme physical stress on brain function has provided new frameworks for understanding how some of the phenomena described in cider accounts might actually work through natural, psychological, and neurological processes rather than supernatural mechanisms. Studies of people who have experienced clinical death and been successfully resuscitated often report experiences that are remarkably similar to those described by Norse Vavlur, encounters with deceased relatives, journeys through otherworldly landscapes, access to information that seems to exceed normal sensory input, and profound psychological changes that persist long after the near-death experience. Contemporary research into controlled consciousness alteration has found that extreme physical stress, sensory deprivation, and certain types of psychoactive substances can induce brain states that facilitate enhanced pattern recognition, increased access to unconscious memories, and heightened sensitivity to environmental cues that might appear to be supernatural perception. But regardless of whether cider death riding involved genuine supernatural abilities or represented an extreme form of ancient psychological technology, these practices demonstrate that Norse culture had developed sophisticated understanding of consciousness, altered states of awareness, and the relationship between physical condition and mental capability that anticipated many discoveries of modern neuroscience and psychology. The archaeological record includes evidence of the specialized burial chambers, ritual objects, and ceremonial practices associated with cider death riding, suggesting that these techniques were real institutions rather than just mythological stories or romantic fantasies about Norse supernatural abilities. Contemporary Scandinavian folklore and traditional practices in some remote areas of Norway, Sweden, and Iceland include references to consciousness-altering techniques that appear to be simplified or modernized versions of traditional cider practices, suggesting that some knowledge of these methods survived the Christianization period through secret oral traditions. But perhaps the most important legacy of Norse cider, death riding, is its demonstration that human consciousness has extraordinary capacities for adaptation, exploration, and manipulation that most people never develop or explore. The Vevlur represented an extreme example of how far human awareness can be pushed through systematic training and disciplined practice, even when such development requires accepting enormous physical and psychological risks. The willingness of Norse practitioners to literally risk death in pursuit of enhanced consciousness and supernatural ability reflects a cultural understanding of the relationship between physical existence and mental capability that challenges modern assumptions about the limitations and possibilities of human awareness. When ancient Vikings were willing to temporarily die and be resurrected just to access deeper dream states and supernatural knowledge, you're dealing with a level of commitment to consciousness exploration that demonstrates how far human beings will go to transcend the normal limitations of awareness and gain access to hidden information that might provide survival advantages in a harsh and unpredictable world. The Norse cider tradition ultimately reminds us that consciousness remains one of the great frontiers of human exploration, and that the techniques developed by ancient cultures for expanding awareness and accessing hidden knowledge might still have relevance for contemporary research into the untapped potentials of the human mind. Let me slow down a bit here and tell you about something that sounds like fantasy. Economics mixed with supernatural capitalism, but was actually ancient Mesopotamian business practice, the Babylonian dream merchant guilds, where professional dreamers operated like commodity traders, buying and selling dreams as valuable goods that could be transferred from one person to another, through elaborate commercial transactions that would make modern financial derivatives look simple and straightforward. Picture this. It's around 1800 BC in ancient Babylon, and dreams are considered such valuable intellectual property that they've developed an entire economy around them that operates parallel to conventional commerce. We're talking about a sophisticated market system where wealthy Babylonians could literally purchase good dreams from professional dreamers. People who had nightmares could sell them to specialists who claimed they could neutralize bad dreams by absorbing them into their own consciousness. And dream brokers facilitated complex transactions involving supernatural experiences that were treated as tangible assets with measurable economic value. Now you have to understand that Babylonian culture didn't view dreams as random psychological phenomena or meaningless brain activity during sleep. These were people who had developed incredibly sophisticated theoretical frameworks for understanding dreams as communications from gods, glimpses of future events, and sources of practical guidance that could determine the success or failure of business ventures, military campaigns, and personal relationships. But what made the Babylonian approach unique was their recognition that dreams weren't just personal experiences that belonged exclusively to the dreamer. They were transferable commodities that could be bought, sold, traded, and manipulated through appropriate commercial and magical procedures. This created the world's first supernatural marketplace where consciousness experiences were treated as valuable goods that could be exchanged for money, services, or other dreams. The dream merchant guilds operated sophisticated businesses with standardized pricing structures that would have impressed modern commodity exchanges. Prophetic dreams about business success, political developments, or military outcomes commanded premium prices because they provided actionable intelligence that could generate substantial profits for purchasers who acted on the dream guidance effectively. Pleasant dreams about romance, family happiness, or personal achievement were moderately priced luxury goods that wealthy Babylonians purchased for psychological comfort and emotional satisfaction. Healing dreams that allegedly provided medical guidance or therapeutic benefits were expensive. Specialized products that competed with conventional physician services. But here's where the Babylonian dream economy gets really weird. Nightmares about death, disaster, financial ruin, or military defeat were actually purchased by the guilds because they believed that neutralizing bad dreams was a public service that protected the entire community from supernatural threats. Nightmare merchants would buy disturbing dreams from people who wanted to get rid of them, then use various magical techniques to absorb the negative spiritual energy and prevent the bad dreams from manifesting as real-world disasters. The professional dreamers who supplied this market underwent years of training to develop the ability to dream on command about specific topics, control the content of their dream experiences, and maintain detailed recall of complex dream narratives that could be accurately transmitted to paying customers. These weren't casual part-time contractors, they were highly skilled specialists whose abilities were essential for the functioning of Babylonian supernatural commerce. The training process involved learning systematic methods for influencing dream content through dietary manipulation, sleeping position control, environmental modification, and the use of various consciousness-altering substances derived from plants and minerals that were available in Mesopotamia. Professional dreamers would experiment with different combinations of these techniques to discover which approaches worked best for generating particular types of dreams. But the most sophisticated aspect of the dream merchant system was the development of standardized techniques for dream quality control and customer satisfaction. Guild dreamers couldn't just claim to have had a prophetic dream and expect payment. They had to provide detailed, verifiable dream reports that met specific criteria for authenticity, usefulness, and accuracy. The guilds maintained extensive records of dream outcomes, tracking which types of dreams consistently provided accurate guidance and which dreamers had the best success rates for different categories of supernatural intelligence. They developed rating systems for dream quality, reliability metrics for individual dreamers, and even customer review processes where purchasers could evaluate the effectiveness of the dreams they had bought. Professional dreamers would accept commissions from wealthy clients who needed particular types of guidance or visions, then used their specialized skills to produce custom dreams that addressed specific questions or concerns. A merchant planning a major trade expedition might commission dreams about optimal routes, potential dangers, and likely profits. A politician seeking office might purchase dreams about effective campaign strategies and potential opponents' weaknesses. But the most successful dream merchants could reportedly dream about incredibly specific business opportunities, romantic prospects, or strategic advantages, then sell these visions to clients who would act on the dream guidance in their waking lives. Some Babylonian entrepreneurs attributed their commercial success to consistently purchasing high-quality prophetic dreams from the most accomplished guild dreamers. The dream transfer process was where Babylonian supernatural commerce became truly elaborate and ritualistic. Purchased dreams couldn't just be verbally described to customers. The actual dream experience had to be transferred from the professional dreamer to the client through ceremonial procedures that allegedly moved the spiritual essence of the dream from one consciousness to another. The transfer ceremonies involved shared sleeping chambers where the dreamer and client would sleep in specially prepared beds that were positioned to facilitate spiritual connection between their consciousness. The chambers were designed according to specific architectural principles that supposedly enhanced the flow of dream energy between individuals. The transfer process also required synchronized breathing exercises where both participants would coordinate their respiratory patterns to create shared consciousness states that would allow the dream experience to move from the seller to the buyer. These breathing techniques were closely guarded trade secrets that different guilds had developed through generations of experimentation. But perhaps the most bizarre aspect of the dream transfer ceremonies was the consumption of special potions made from various psychoactive plants, animal secretions, and mineral compounds that were believed to facilitate the movement of dream content between different minds. These transferring substances were expensive and sometimes dangerous, requiring careful preparation by skilled alchemists who specialized in consciousness manipulation chemistry. The Babylonian legal system recognized dream ownership as legitimate property rights and included comprehensive laws governing dream commerce, intellectual property disputes, and consumer protection for supernatural transactions. Legal codes specified the rights and responsibilities of dream merchants and their customers, established procedures for resolving disputes over dream quality and effectiveness, and created enforcement mechanisms for contracts involving supernatural services. Court records show that dream merchants could be sued if their dreams didn't provide the promised guidance, if prophetic dreams proved inaccurate, or if nightmares were incompletely neutralized and continued to trouble the client after the supposed removal process. These lawsuits were taken seriously by Babylonian judges who had developed expertise in evaluating supernatural commercial claims. The legal framework also included provisions for dream fraud, cases where unscrupulous merchants would fabricate dream reports or claim to have supernatural abilities they didn't actually possess. Babylonian courts developed sophisticated methods for testing the authenticity of dream experiences and the effectiveness of dream transfer procedures. But the dream merchant guilds also faced serious competition from independent practitioners, foreign dream workers, and religious institutions that offered alternative approaches to supernatural guidance and dream manipulation. This competition drove innovation in dream production techniques and led to increasingly sophisticated marketing strategies designed to attract and retain customers in the competitive supernatural services market. The guilds developed brand recognition systems where customers could identify the quality and reliability of different dream merchants through standardized symbols, reputation ratings, and customer testimonials. The most successful guilds operated multiple locations throughout Babylonia and maintained extensive networks of professional dreamers who specialized in different types of supernatural services. Guild membership was highly exclusive and required extensive training, demonstrated competence in dream production and transfer techniques, and adherence to strict ethical codes that governed interactions with customers and competitors. The guilds also provided insurance and legal protection for their members, helping them navigate the complex regulatory environment that governed supernatural commerce. The economic impact of the dream merchant system was substantial enough that it influenced Babylonian monetary policy, taxation structures, and international trade relationships. Dream merchants paid significant taxes on their supernatural commerce, and the royal treasury collected substantial revenues from licensing fees, regulatory compliance costs, and customs duties on imported dream-enhancing substances. International trade in dream-related commodities became an important component of Babylonian foreign commerce, with specialized merchants importing rare plants, minerals, and manufactured goods that were essential for dream production and transfer processes. Some foreign nations developed their own dream merchant systems based on Babylonian models, creating international markets for supernatural services. But the dream merchant guilds also created social tensions and cultural conflicts within Babylonian society. Traditional religious authorities were often suspicious of commercial dream practices, arguing that divine guidance shouldn't be bought and sold like ordinary merchandise. Some religious leaders claimed that commercial dream work was spiritually corrupting and that authentic divine communication could only occur through proper religious channels. The guilds also faced criticism from philosophers and intellectuals who questioned whether dreams could really be transferred between individuals, or whether the entire system was elaborate fraud that exploited people's psychological needs and supernatural beliefs. These debates contributed to ongoing cultural discussions about the nature of consciousness, the reality of supernatural phenomena, and the appropriate relationship between spiritual experience and commercial activity. Despite these controversies, the Babylonian dream merchant system operated successfully for several centuries and influenced the development of similar practices in other ancient civilizations. Egyptian, Persian, and later Greek and Roman cultures all developed their own versions of commercial dream work that borrowed techniques and concepts from the original Babylonian model. The decline of Babylonian civilization led to the gradual disappearance of organized dream merchant guilds, though some historians argue that similar practices persisted in modified forms throughout the ancient Mediterranean world and may have influenced the development of later traditions involving professional dream interpretation and supernatural commerce. Modern researchers who study ancient Mesopotamian culture have found extensive documentary evidence for the dream merchant system, including contract records, legal proceedings, regulatory codes, and business correspondence that demonstrates the sophisticated organization and widespread acceptance of commercial dream practices in Babylonian society. Contemporary scholars debate whether the dream merchant system represented genuine, supernatural phenomena or was primarily a form of ancient psychological services that provided therapeutic benefits through suggestion, social support, and structured fantasy experiences. But regardless of their ultimate effectiveness, the Babylonian dream guilds demonstrate the human capacity for creating elaborate economic systems around consciousness experiences and supernatural beliefs. The legacy of Babylonian dream commerce can be seen in modern practices ranging from professional dream interpretation and therapeutic guided imagery to contemporary spiritual coaching and consciousness-based healing services that treat mental and emotional experiences as valuable commodities that can be enhanced, modified, or exchanged through appropriate techniques and procedures. When ancient Babylonians were operating sophisticated commercial markets for buying and selling dreams as transferable supernatural commodities, you're dealing with a level of economic creativity and supernatural entrepreneurship that demonstrates how human societies can create complex value systems around consciousness experiences and develop institutional frameworks for commercializing even the most intangible aspects of mental and spiritual life. Now let's talk about the Celts, who developed one of the most romantic, bizarre, and psychologically intense dream customs in history, dream-binding ceremonies where couples would undergo elaborate multi-day rituals designed to permanently connect their dream lives, allowing them to share the same dreams, communicate through sleep for the rest of their lives, and maintain spiritual relationships that could supposedly survive death and continue into whatever afterlife awaited them. Picture this. It's around 500 BC in the misty hills and ancient forests of Celtic Britain and Ireland, where love wasn't just about physical attraction or practical marriage arrangements. but was understood as a spiritual force that could literally merge consciousness between two people and create supernatural bonds that transcended normal human relationships. Celtic Druids believed that true love could only be achieved when two people could meet not just in the physical world, but also in the dream realm, sharing their sleeping consciousness and creating a form of mental intimacy that went far beyond anything that conventional relationships could provide. Now, you have to understand that Celtic culture had incredibly sophisticated and mystical approaches to both love and dreams that made their relationship customs far more spiritually ambitious than anything we see in modern romance. These weren't people who thought love was just emotional attachment or sexual compatibility. They believed that genuine love required the actual fusion of souls that could be achieved through specific magical procedures that would permanently alter the consciousness of both participants. The Celts understood dreams as a parallel reality where souls could travel freely, communicate with spirits and ancestors, and experience forms of existence that were impossible in the physical world. They developed elaborate theoretical frameworks for understanding how consciousness operated during sleep and created systematic methods for manipulating dream experiences to achieve specific spiritual and practical objectives. But dream-binding ceremonies represented the most advanced and dangerous application of Celtic dream magic, a permanent alteration of consciousness that would connect two people's dream lives so completely that they would essentially share a single sleeping mind for the rest of their existence. This wasn't temporary or reversible once the binding was completed. The couple would be psychically linked during sleep until death and possibly beyond. The ceremonies could only be performed by the most skilled druids who had undergone decades of training in consciousness manipulation, plant medicine preparation, and the complex magical procedures required to create permanent psychic connections between different individuals. These weren't casual folk rituals that anyone could attempt. They were serious, magical operations that required extensive preparation and carried significant risks for both participants. The selection process for couples who wanted to undergo dream binding was incredibly rigorous and could take years to complete. The Druids would interview potential participants extensively about their relationship, their individual spiritual development, their psychological compatibility, and their willingness to accept the permanent changes that successful binding would create in their consciousness and identity. But the Druids weren't just checking for romantic compatibility, they were evaluating whether the couple had the spiritual maturity and psychological resilience necessary to handle shared consciousness without losing their individual identity or experiencing mental breakdown from the intense intimacy that dream binding would create. The preparation phase for dream binding ceremonies involved months of preliminary training where couples would learn meditation techniques, dream recall methods, and consciousness control practices that would prepare them for the advanced procedures involved in permanent psychic connection. Both participants had to demonstrate the ability to achieve lucid dreaming, maintain awareness during different stages of sleep, and control their dream content with sufficient precision to interact consciously with another person's dream experience. The couples also underwent extensive purification rituals that included dietary restrictions, sexual abstinence, ritual bathing in sacred springs, and consumption of various herbs and plant medicines that were believed to cleanse their consciousness and enhance their receptivity to magical procedures. These purification processes could last for several months and were designed to eliminate psychological and spiritual obstacles that might interfere with successful consciousness merging. But perhaps the most demanding aspect of the preparation was the requirement that couples demonstrate their commitment to shared consciousness by spending extended periods, sleeping together while maintaining synchronized dream experiences through willpower alone. This preliminary practice served as both training and testing couples who couldn't achieve basic dream. Synchronization through conscious effort were considered unsuitable for permanent binding procedures. The actual dream binding ceremony was a multi-day ritual that took place in sacred groves or stone circles that had been specially prepared for consciousness manipulation work. These locations were chosen for their spiritual significance and their isolation from ordinary human activity that might interfere with the delicate magical procedures involved in permanent psychic connection. The ceremony began with elaborate invocations to Celtic deities who governed love, dreams, and consciousness, particularly Brigid, goddess of inspiration and mystical knowledge, and Law, god of skill and spiritual achievement. The Druids would create sacred space through complex ritual procedures that supposedly opened gateways between the physical and spiritual worlds, allowing supernatural forces to assist with the consciousness binding process. The central element of the ceremony involved the couple sleeping together on specially prepared beds made from specific types of sacred wood, typically oak, ash, or rowan that had been harvested, during particular lunar phases and treated with oils and resins that were believed to enhance psychic connection. The bed construction itself was a magical procedure that required precise attention to astronomical timing, material preparation, and ritual consecration. But the most intense and dangerous part of the ceremony involved the consumption of powerful hallucinogenic preparations that would alter the couple's consciousness so dramatically that their individual awareness would become fluid and malleable enough to merge into shared dream experiences. These psychoactive compounds were derived from plants like fly agaric mushrooms, ergot-infected grains, and various toxic herbs that grew in Celtic territories. The hallucinogenic preparations were incredibly dangerous and required precise dosing and careful monitoring by experienced druids who understood how to induce consciousness-altering effects without causing permanent mental damage or death. Many couples didn't survive the dream-binding process because the drugs were too powerful or because their consciousness couldn't handle the psychological stress of ego dissolution and identity merger. During the drug-induced altered states, the couple would sleep while bound together with cords made from sacred plants, typically mistletoe, ivy, or specially prepared hemp, that supposedly created physical connections that would facilitate spiritual bonding. Their foreheads would be touching. Their breathing would be synchronized through specific techniques taught by the Druids, and their bodies would be positioned according to complex magical principles that governed consciousness interaction. The Druids would monitor the sleeping couple throughout the binding process, using various techniques to assess the progress of consciousness merger and to intervene if the procedure became dangerous or threatened to cause permanent psychological damage. They claimed they could observe the spiritual connection forming between the couple and could determine when the binding had been successfully completed. The process typically required 3 to 7 days of continuous drug-enhanced sleep, during which the couple would allegedly experience increasingly merged dream states that would gradually dissolve the boundaries between their individual consciousness and create a new form of shared awareness that would persist after they woke up. Successful dream binding supposedly allowed couples to communicate telepathically through their dreams, share experiences while sleeping even when they were separated by great distances, and visit each other's dreams to provide comfort, guidance, or companionship regardless of physical circumstances. Celtic literature includes numerous stories of lovers who maintained relationships across vast distances through their bound dream connections. But the most romantic and touching aspect of Celtic dream binding was the belief that couples who had undergone the ceremony would be reunited in the dream realm after death, essentially creating eternal relationships that continued beyond physical existence. This made dream binding one of the most sacred and permanent commitments in Celtic culture, more binding than marriage and more enduring than any earthly relationship. The psychological effects of successful dream binding were reportedly profound and permanent. Bound couples often developed enhanced empathy and emotional connection that went far beyond normal human relationships. They would finish each other's thoughts, anticipate each other's needs, and maintain emotional intimacy that seemed to exceed what physical proximity alone could provide. But dream binding also created challenges and complications that could be difficult for couples to handle. The constant psychic connection could become overwhelming. The shared dream experiences could be confusing or intrusive, and the loss of individual privacy during sleep could create psychological stress that affected their waking relationships. Some bound couples reported losing their sense of individual identity and becoming so psychically merged that they had difficulty functioning as separate people in their daily lives. Others found that their shared dream experiences were dominated by one partner's consciousness, creating imbalances that affected their relationship dynamics in the physical world. The Celtic Druids developed various techniques for managing the challenges associated with dream binding, including ritual procedures for temporarily suspending the psychic connection when couples needed individual dream experiences, methods for strengthening the bond when the connection became weak, and emergency procedures for severing the binding if it became psychologically dangerous. But severing a dream binding was considered extremely dangerous and was rarely attempted because the psychological trauma of sudden, psychic disconnection could cause permanent mental damage or even death for both participants. Most bound couples remained connected for life, regardless of whether their relationship remained happy or became problematic. The social implications of dream binding were complex and sometimes controversial within Celtic communities. Bound couples were often viewed with a mixture of admiration and suspicion. Their spiritual achievement was respected, but their intense psychic connection could make other people uncomfortable and could create social dynamics that disrupted normal community relationships. Dream binding also raised practical questions about marriage, fidelity, and family structure that Celtic society had to address through custom and law. Bound couples were often considered more permanently committed than married couples, and adultery or abandonment of a dream-bound partner was viewed as particularly serious moral violations. The ceremony was expensive and time-consuming, requiring substantial payments to the Druids, extended periods away from normal work and family responsibilities, and ongoing costs for the herbs and materials needed to maintain the psychic connection. This meant that dream binding was primarily available to wealthy Celtic nobles and tribal leaders rather than ordinary community members. But the influence of dream binding ceremonies extended beyond the couples who underwent them to affect broader Celtic understanding of love, consciousness, and spiritual development. The ceremonies demonstrated that human relationships could achieve levels of intimacy and connection that exceeded normal social and psychological boundaries. The decline of Celtic culture and the Christianization of Britain and Ireland led to the suppression of dream-binding ceremonies, which were viewed by Christian authorities as pagan magic and potentially demonic practices that threatened Christian understanding of marriage and spiritual relationships. However, some elements of Celtic dream-binding traditions may have survived in folklore and folk magic practices that persisted in rural areas of Scotland, Ireland, and Wales long after the official conversion to Christianity. Some traditional marriage customs in Celtic regions include elements that appear to be simplified or Christianized versions of ancient dream-binding procedures. Modern Celtic Reconstructionist movements and contemporary pagan traditions have attempted to revive dream-binding ceremonies based on historical research and surviving folklore, though these modern versions generally emphasize psychological and spiritual benefits rather than literal consciousness, merger, and typically avoid the dangerous hallucinogenic elements of the original ceremonies. Contemporary relationship counselors and spiritual teachers sometimes reference Celtic dream binding as an example of how romantic relationships can be understood and developed as spiritual practices that enhance consciousness and personal growth rather than just emotional and physical partnerships. But the most important legacy of Celtic dream-binding ceremonies is their demonstration that human consciousness has capacities for connection and intimacy that exceed what most people ever explore or develop. The ceremonies represent an extreme example of how far human beings are willing to go to achieve deeper forms of love and spiritual connection. The psychological insights embedded in Celtic dream-binding practices continue to influence contemporary understanding of consciousness, relationships, and the potential for human beings to develop forms of awareness and connection that transcend normal individual boundaries. When ancient Celts were willing to permanently merge their dream consciousness with their lovers through dangerous magical procedures that could last for eternity, you're dealing with a level of romantic and spiritual ambition that demonstrates the extraordinary, lengths that human beings will go to achieve deeper forms of love, connection, and shared consciousness that transcend the normal limitations of individual existence. Now, let's slow down even more and explore the fascinating historical and scientific background behind these ancient dream practices, because understanding how different cultures throughout history have approached the mystery of sleep reveals something profound about human consciousness, our eternal quest to understand. What happens when we close our eyes and drift into that strange realm we call dreams, and why every civilization we know about has developed elaborate theories and practices around these nightly journeys into unconsciousness. The thing about ancient dream customs is that they represent humanity's earliest attempts at psychology, neuroscience, consciousness research, and therapeutic intervention, all rolled into sophisticated theoretical frameworks that were developed thousands of years before we had scientific instruments to study the brain or systematic methods for investigating mental processes. These weren't just random superstitions or primitive beliefs. They were carefully observed, systematically tested, and continuously refined approaches to understanding the relationship between mind, body, spirit, and whatever forces govern human consciousness during sleep. Every culture we've discussed tonight developed their dream practices for the same fundamental reasons. They recognized that dreams seem to provide access to information and experiences that exceeded normal waking consciousness. They understood that sleep states could be influenced and controlled through specific techniques, and they wanted to harness that power for practical purposes like healing, prophecy, problem solving, spiritual development, and even military advantage. But what's really remarkable is how similar the basic insights were across completely different cultures and time periods, despite having no contact with each other and no shared knowledge base to draw from. Whether you're looking at Egyptian incubation temples, Mayan dream warriors, Roman legal proceedings, Norse death rituals, or Tibetan consciousness training, you find the same core understanding that dreams are not just random mental activity, but represent a different type of consciousness that can be studied, trained, and applied to real-world challenges. Let's start with the earliest recorded approaches to systematic dream work, which emerged in ancient Mesopotamia around 4000 BC, making dream interpretation and manipulation one of humanity's oldest intellectual disciplines. The Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians were probably the first civilizations to develop professional classes of dream specialists, detailed classification systems for different types of dreams, and systematic methods for inducing specific types of visions through environmental manipulation and consciousness-altering techniques. Mesopotamian dream practices were remarkably sophisticated for their time, incorporating insights about the relationship between physical environment, mental state, psychological preparation, and dream content that modern sleep research is only beginning to validate through controlled scientific studies. They understood that factors like diet, sleeping position, room temperature, acoustic environment, visual surroundings, and even the phase of the moon could influence dream experiences in predictable ways that could be manipulated to achieve desired outcomes. The ancient Mesopotamians also developed some of the earliest theories about the relationship between individual dreams and collective social welfare, recognizing that the dream experiences of rulers and priests could affect entire communities through their influence on political decisions, military strategy, and religious practices. This led to sophisticated systems for evaluating the social implications of personal dream experiences and for using dream guidance to benefit entire civilizations. But perhaps most importantly, Mesopotamian culture established the principle that dreams were a legitimate source of knowledge that deserved the same serious attention as any other form of investigation or research. They created professional institutions, educational systems, and even legal frameworks that treated dream-derived information as valid and valuable rather than dismissing it as superstition or fantasy. Ancient Egypt took dream research even further, developing what might be the most advanced sleep laboratory system in the ancient world. Egyptian dream incubation temples were essentially early versions of controlled experimental facilities where specific environmental conditions were systematically manipulated to study the relationship between external factors and dream content, while also providing therapeutic services for people seeking healing or guidance through dream experiences. Egyptian priests maintained incredibly detailed records of thousands of dream experiences, tracking correlations between preparation methods and dream outcomes with a level of systematic observation and data collection that wouldn't be seen again until the modern scientific era. They documented which dietary restrictions enhanced prophetic dreams, which architectural features promoted healing visions, which ritual procedures increased the likelihood of receiving divine guidance, and which combinations of techniques were most effective for different types of problems. But Egyptian dream science also included sophisticated understanding of what we now call placebo effect suggestion and the role of expectation in shaping experience. They recognized that people's beliefs about dreams could influence their dream content, and they developed elaborate psychological techniques for preparing dreamers to receive particular types of visions, while also maintaining objective evaluation of whether the dreams actually provided useful information or therapeutic benefits. The Egyptians were also pioneers in understanding the social and economic dimensions of dream work, creating some of the world's first professional therapeutic services, developing training programs for dream specialists, and establishing quality control systems that could evaluate the effectiveness of different practitioners and techniques. Their approach to dream work as a legitimate professional field with educational requirements, ethical standards, and measurable outcomes anticipated many aspects of modern healthcare and psychological services. Greek and Roman cultures approached dreams through philosophical frameworks that emphasized their psychological and spiritual significance rather than just their practical applications. Greek philosophers like Aristotle, Plato, and later Stoic thinkers wrote extensively about dreams as windows into the nature of consciousness, memory, imagination, and the relationship between mental experience and physical reality. The Greeks developed some of the earliest systematic theories about the psychological mechanisms underlying dream formation, recognizing that dream content often reflected the dreamer's memories, emotions, concerns, and physical condition in ways that could provide insights into their mental and physical health. This psychological approach to dream interpretation influenced later developments in medicine, philosophy, and what would eventually become modern psychology. Greek dream incubation practices at healing temples dedicated to Asclepius represented sophisticated integration of medical treatment, psychological therapy, and spiritual counseling that anticipated modern holistic approaches to healthcare. The Greeks understood that physical illness often had psychological and spiritual components that needed to be addressed through comprehensive treatment that included attention to the patient's dream life and mental state. Roman culture contributed important innovations in the systematic study and application of dream experiences, particularly through their development of legal frameworks for evaluating supernatural claims and their systematic approaches to using dream guidance for political and military decision-making. Roman administrators created some of the earliest bureaucratic systems for processing and validating claims about prophetic dreams, while also establishing quality control measures that could distinguish between reliable and unreliable sources of supernatural intelligence. But Roman culture also developed critical and skeptical traditions that questioned the reliability of dreams and warned against making important decisions based solely on dream experiences without corroborating evidence from other sources. This tension between belief and skepticism created more balanced approaches to dream interpretation that recognized both the potential value and the potential dangers of taking dreams too seriously without proper evaluation. The Roman legal system's approach to dream-related evidence, despite its bizarre applications in the Samnia tribunals, actually established important precedents for evaluating subjective experiences as legitimate forms of evidence, while also requiring corroboration and verification that anticipated modern approaches to investigating psychological and spiritual claims. Asian cultures, particularly in China, Tibet, and India, developed perhaps the most psychologically sophisticated and scientifically advanced approaches to dream practice that have ever been recorded. These traditions treated dreams not as external communications from gods or spirits, but as expressions of consciousness itself that could be trained, controlled, and used for systematic investigation of the nature of mind and reality. Buddhist and Hindu dream yoga practices were based on incredibly detailed theories about the nature of consciousness, the relationship between individual awareness and universal mind, and the mechanisms through which mental training could influence both individual experience and broader understanding of reality. These traditions developed systematic methods for achieving lucid dreaming, maintaining awareness during sleep, and using dream experiences as laboratories for investigating fundamental questions about the nature of existence. Tibetan Buddhism created what might be the most sophisticated consciousness training program in human history, with techniques that allowed practitioners to maintain full awareness through deep sleep, simulated death experiences, and what they believed were the intermediate states between lives. Modern neuroscience studies of Tibetan meditation masters have confirmed that their brains show unusual patterns of activity during sleep that are unlike anything seen in normal dreamers, suggesting that their training actually produces measurable changes in brain function. Chinese Taoist traditions developed dream practices that emphasized harmony between individual consciousness and natural rhythms, creating techniques for synchronizing dream cycles with seasonal changes, lunar phases, and other natural patterns. They believed that consciousness could be aligned with cosmic forces through proper sleep practices, and they developed systematic approaches to using dreams for health maintenance, longevity, and spiritual development. Indian yogic traditions contributed crucial insights about the relationship between breathing, physical posture, mental concentration, and consciousness states during sleep. They developed precise techniques for maintaining awareness during the transition from waking to sleeping, and they created systematic methods for using dream experiences to develop supernatural abilities and enhance perception. But perhaps most importantly, Asian dream traditions established the principle that consciousness training was a legitimate scientific discipline that could be studied, systematically taught effectively, and applied practically for both individual development and collective benefit. They created educational institutions, research methodologies, and even experimental protocols that anticipated many aspects of modern consciousness research. Islamic cultures made crucial contributions to dream science through their emphasis on systematic observation, careful documentation, and critical evaluation of spiritual claims. Islamic scholars like Ibn Sina, Avicenna, Al-Ghazali, and Ibn Khaldun wrote detailed treatises on dream psychology that influenced European thinking for centuries and established important principles for distinguishing between reliable and unreliable sources of spiritual guidance. Islamic dream interpretation emphasized moral and ethical preparation as prerequisites for receiving meaningful visions, developing sophisticated frameworks for evaluating the spiritual authenticity of dream experiences based on their consistency with Islamic theological principles and their practical outcomes in the dreamer's life. This ethical approach to dream evaluation created important safeguards against self-deception and spiritual manipulation. Medieval Islamic scholars also developed systematic methods for testing prophetic dreams against subsequent events, creating some of the earliest empirical approaches to validating supernatural claims through careful observation and statistical analysis. They maintained detailed records of dream predictions and their accuracy rates, establishing quality control systems that could identify reliable dreamers and effective interpretation techniques. But Islamic culture also contributed important insights about the relationship between spiritual purification, moral development, and the quality of dream experiences. Islamic scholars understood that the reliability of dream guidance depended partly on the dreamer's spiritual condition, ethical behavior, and sincere intention to use dream insights for beneficial purposes rather than selfish gain. Indigenous shamanic traditions throughout the Americas, Africa, Australia, and other regions developed dream practices that emphasized the connection between individual consciousness, community welfare, and harmony with natural forces. These traditions treated dreams as opportunities for communication with ancestral spirits, animal guides, and the living spirits of plants, animals, and geographical features. Shamanic dream practices often involved the use of plant medicines that could induce profound alterations in consciousness during sleep, creating dream experiences that exceeded normal psychological boundaries and provided access to information and insights that seemed to come from sources beyond individual knowledge and experience. These practices contributed important understanding about the relationship between brain chemistry, consciousness states, and the types of information that become accessible during altered states of awareness. What's remarkable about shamanic dream traditions is their sophisticated understanding of dreams as collaborative experiences that could be shared among multiple participants and used for collective problem-solving and decision-making. Many shamanic cultures develop techniques for group dreaming where entire communities could participate in shared visions that would guide tribal responses to challenges, opportunities, and threats. But shamanic traditions also emphasize the importance of proper training, ethical preparation, and community oversight for people who wanted to use consciousness-altering techniques for spiritual and practical purposes. They recognized that powerful dream experiences could be psychologically destabilizing and potentially dangerous without appropriate guidance and support systems. Modern scientific research into dreams has validated many insights that ancient cultures developed through empirical observation and systematic experimentation over thousands of years. Contemporary neuroscience has confirmed that dream content can indeed be influenced by environmental factors, like temperature, sunlight exposure, and dietary conditions, just as ancient dream workers claimed based on their careful observations of cause and effect relationships. Sleep research has also validated the importance of psychological preparation, expectation, and ritual context in shaping dream experiences. Studies show that people who expect to have particular types of dreams are significantly more likely to experience them, supporting ancient claims about the power of mental preparation and ceremonial procedures for influencing dream content and outcomes. Modern studies of lucid dreaming have found that the techniques developed by Tibetan, Buddhist, Islamic mystics, and other contemplative traditions can indeed allow people to maintain consciousness during REM sleep and exercise control over their dream experiences. Brain imaging studies show that lucid dreamers have enhanced activity in brain regions associated with self-awareness and executive control, confirming that dream consciousness can be systematically trained and developed. Research into psychoactive substances has revealed that many of the plants used in ancient dream practices contain compounds that specifically affect brain chemistry during sleep in ways that can enhance REM sleep, increase dream vividness, and facilitate the kind of consciousness alterations that ancient dreamers sought to achieve for spiritual and practical purposes. But modern science has also revealed important information about the potential dangers inherent in many ancient dream practices. Contemporary sleep research emphasizes the importance of healthy sleep hygiene and warns against practices that disrupt normal sleep patterns, involve dangerous substances, or create psychological stress that could interfere with the natural restorative functions of sleep. The integration of ancient wisdom with modern scientific understanding has led to new approaches to dream work that combine the psychological insights of traditional practices with the safety protocols and empirical validation methods of contemporary research. Modern therapeutic applications of dream work include the use of lucid dreaming for treating nightmares, the application of dream analysis for psychological healing, and the development of guided dreaming techniques for enhancing creativity and problem-solving abilities. Contemporary researchers are particularly interested in the therapeutic applications of dream work for treating trauma, depression, anxiety, and other mental health conditions. Studies have found that systematic attention to dream experiences can provide valuable insights into psychological patterns, emotional processing, and unconscious mental activity that can support therapeutic healing and personal development. The study of ancient dream practices has also contributed to our understanding of cultural differences in consciousness and the relationship between belief systems, social expectations, and subjective experience. What people expect to experience in dreams, how they interpret those experiences, and what meaning they assign to dream content varies dramatically across cultures and historical periods, but the underlying capacity for enhanced awareness during sleep appears to be universal. But perhaps most importantly, the examination of ancient dream customs reveals the persistent human fascination with consciousness and our ongoing attempts to understand and harness the mysterious processes that occur during sleep. Whether through Egyptian incubation temples, Tibetan death yoga, Roman legal proceedings, or contemporary sleep laboratories, humans have consistently sought to unlock the secrets hidden in our nightly journeys through the realm of dreams. This historical perspective reminds us that dreams remain one of the great mysteries of human experience, and that our contemporary scientific understanding, while more empirically grounded than ancient approaches, is still incomplete and evolving. The wisdom preserved in traditional dream practices may yet contribute to future discoveries about consciousness, creativity, memory consolidation, and the untapped potentials of the sleeping mind. Modern dream research has also revealed fascinating connections between sleep creativity and problem solving that validate ancient beliefs about the practical value of dream experiences. Studies have found that REM sleep plays crucial roles in memory consolidation, emotional processing, and the kind of cognitive restructuring that can lead to creative insights and innovative solutions to complex problems. The relationship between dreaming and learning has become an important area of contemporary research, with scientists discovering that sleep experiences can enhance memory formation, facilitate skill acquisition, and support the kind of mental reorganization that enables new understanding and creative breakthrough. This research provides scientific support for ancient practices that use dream experiences as educational tools and consciousness development techniques. Contemporary neuroscience has also identified specific brain networks and chemical processes that are involved in dream formation, lucid dreaming, and the various types of consciousness that can occur during different stages of sleep. This research has revealed that the brain remains remarkably active during sleep, engaging in complex information processing, emotional regulation, and creative problem solving that was largely invisible to earlier scientific investigation. But modern research has also confirmed that individual differences in dream experiences are significant, and that some people are naturally more capable of achieving lucid dreams, maintaining awareness during sleep, and using dream experiences for practical purposes. This validates ancient selection criteria for dream training programs, while also suggesting that dream abilities can be developed through appropriate practice and instruction. The therapeutic applications of modern dream work continue to expand as researchers discover new ways to use sleep experiences for healing trauma, enhancing creativity, supporting psychological development, and improving overall mental health. Contemporary approaches emphasize safety, informed consent, and integration with conventional medical and psychological treatment rather than replacing established therapeutic methods. Educational applications of dream research are also emerging, with some schools and training programs beginning to incorporate understanding of sleep and dreaming into their curricula as ways to enhance learning, creativity, and personal development. This represents a modern return to ancient approaches that viewed dream education as an essential component of human development and cultural transmission. The ongoing development of technology for monitoring and influencing sleep has created new opportunities for systematic dream research that were impossible for ancient practitioners. Modern sleep laboratories can precisely measure brain activity, monitor physiological changes, and even influence dream content through various technical interventions that provide unprecedented insights into the mechanisms underlying dream experiences. But this technological capability also raises important ethical questions about the appropriate limits of dream manipulation and the potential risks of using artificial methods to alter consciousness during sleep. The wisdom of ancient traditions that emphasize gradual training, ethical preparation, and community oversight may be increasingly relevant as we develop more powerful tools for influencing dream experiences. The relationship between individual dream experiences and collective cultural development continues to be an important area of research as scientists and anthropologists try to understand how personal spiritual experiences translate into broader social movements, religious innovations, and cultural transformations that can affect entire civilizations. Contemporary globalization has created unprecedented opportunities for sharing dream traditions across cultural boundaries, allowing modern practitioners to learn from multiple ancient systems, while also contributing to the development of new approaches that integrate insights from different traditions with contemporary scientific understanding. But this cultural mixing also creates challenges for maintaining the integrity and effectiveness of traditional practices that were developed within specific cultural contexts and may lose their meaning or effectiveness when removed from their original social and spiritual frameworks. The future of dream research will likely involve continued integration of ancient wisdom with modern, scientific methods, creating comprehensive approaches to understanding consciousness that combine the empirical rigor of contemporary research with the practical insights developed through thousands of years of systematic dream practice. When we understand dreams as natural expressions of consciousness that can be studied, trained, and applied for both individual development and collective benefit rather than just random mental activity or meaningless brain static, we can appreciate their role in human development and cultural evolution that has shaped our species' understanding of consciousness, creativity, and the mysterious relationship between individual awareness and collective wisdom. The historical and scientific understanding of dream practices ultimately reveals them as bridges between individual consciousness and collective knowledge, between personal experience and cultural wisdom, between ancient insight and modern discovery, demonstrating the profound continuity in human efforts to understand and harness the creative potential of the sleeping mind across cultures, centuries, and the ongoing evolution of our species' relationship with consciousness itself. Let me share some truly obscure facts about ancient dream customs that most people have never heard, but that reveal the most bizarre, fascinating, and honestly disturbing aspects of how our ancestors approached the mystery of sleep and dreaming. These are the kinds of details that somehow got lost in history textbooks, buried in archaeological footnotes, and forgotten by mainstream scholarship, but that show just how creative, desperate, and sometimes completely unhinged human beings could be when it came to understanding and controlling their dreams. During the late Roman Empire, there existed a completely secret and illegal industry that has been almost entirely erased from historical records. Dream brothels were wealthy. Romans could pay enormous sums to have trained courtesans enter their dreams and provide sexual experiences that supposedly couldn't be achieved in waking life, creating what might be the world's first supernatural prostitution network that operated entirely through consciousness manipulation and dream projection techniques. These establishments, which operated in the shadows of Roman society from roughly 200 to 400 AD, represented the convergence of several Roman obsessions: sophisticated understanding of consciousness, elaborate sexual practices, and the belief that dreams could be shared and manipulated through appropriate magical procedures. The dream courtesans were specially trained women who claimed they could project their consciousness into clients' dreams and provide intimate experiences that felt completely real but left no physical evidence, no social consequences, and no risk of disease or pregnancy. The training for dream courtesans was extraordinarily complex and dangerous, involving years of preparation and techniques that combined sexual arts with consciousness manipulation, meditation practices, breath control, and consumption of various psychoactive substances that were believed to enhance dream projection abilities. These women were among the most educated and skilled practitioners of Roman dream magic, though their profession was completely illegal and socially condemned, and discovery could result in execution for both the courtesans and their clients. The dream brothels operated through elaborate security measures that would have impressed modern intelligence agencies. They were typically hidden in underground chambers beneath legitimate businesses, like bathhouses, taverns, or private residences, with complex systems of password secret entrances, coded communications, and elaborate procedures for ensuring anonymity that protected both the operators and their wealthy clientele from prosecution by Roman authorities. But what made these establishments truly bizarre was their sophisticated pricing structure and service offerings that treated consciousness experiences like commodity goods. Clients could purchase different types of dream encounters, from simple romantic experiences to elaborate fantasy scenarios involving multiple participants, exotic locations, or even encounters with mythological beings like nymphs, goddesses, or supernatural creatures that were impossible to experience in physical reality. The most expensive services involved what the Romans called impossible dreams, sexual experiences that violated the laws of physics. involved transformation into animals or mythological creatures, allowed clients to experience sensations from multiple bodies simultaneously, or provided access to sexual activities that would have been physically dangerous or socially catastrophic in waking life. These premium services reportedly cost the equivalent of several years' wages for ordinary Romans. The dream courtesans used various techniques for entering and controlling clients. Dream experiences, including synchronized sleeping schedules, shared consumption of consciousness-altering substances, physical contact during sleep to facilitate psychic connection, and elaborate ritual procedures that supposedly open pathways between different peoples. Consciousness during REM sleep. The most skilled practitioners claim they could maintain full awareness and control during shared dream experiences while also appearing completely natural and responsive within the client's dream narrative. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of these dream brothels was their reported effectiveness in providing psychological satisfaction that exceeded what clients could achieve through normal sexual relationships. Many wealthy Romans became addicted to dream encounters that offered complete fantasy fulfillment without any of the emotional complications, social obligations, or physical limitations that characterize conventional relationships. Some clients reportedly spent fortunes on dream services while neglecting their actual families and social responsibilities. The psychological impact of regular participation in dream prostitution created problems that Roman physicians and philosophers struggled to understand and treat. Clients often developed what we might now recognize as dissociative disorders, becoming unable to distinguish between dream experiences and waking reality, or losing interest in physical relationships because they had become dependent on the unlimited fantasy possibilities that dream encounters provided. Contemporary Roman moralists wrote extensively about the corruption and decadence of dream brothels, though their descriptions were often so veiled and euphemistic that modern historians have had difficulty understanding exactly what services were being provided and how the consciousness manipulation techniques actually worked. Some accounts suggest that the dream courtesans used combinations of drugs, hypnosis, and suggestion to create shared hallucinations rather than genuine dream projection, but other sources describe experiences that seem to exceed what conventional psychological manipulation could achieve. The dream brothel industry eventually disappeared during the Christianization of Rome, when such practices were condemned as demonic and potentially heretical. Christian authorities viewed dream prostitution as particularly dangerous because it seemed to offer spiritual intimacy and transcendent experiences that competed with religious salvation and divine love. The systematic persecution of dream courtesans led to the destruction of most evidence about their techniques and practices, though. Archaeological excavations have occasionally uncovered underground chambers with architectural features that appear to be designed for consciousness manipulation and shared dreaming. The Aztecs developed one of the most psychologically complex and spiritually disturbing dream customs in human history, a lottery system where people who reported specific types of prophetic dreams would be selected for ritual human sacrifice based on the belief that dreamers who received visions from the gods were the most valuable offerings that could be made to ensure cosmic balance. But the really twisted aspect was that people actually competed to be selected for dream sacrifice, believing that dying as a result of prophetic dreams would guarantee them immediate entry into the highest levels of the afterlife. This system, which operated during major religious festivals throughout the Aztec Empire from roughly 1400 to 1520 AD, represented the intersection of several Aztec beliefs about dreams, divine communication, human sacrifice, and cosmic responsibility. The Aztecs understood that maintaining the balance between order and chaos, life and death, human world and divine realm, required constant offerings of the most precious substances available, and they believed that people who had received direct communications from the gods through their dreams were the most spiritually valuable sacrificial offerings possible. The dream lottery operated during major religious festivals, particularly those dedicated to Tezcatlipoca, Quetzalcoatl, and other deities who were believed to communicate with humans through dreams. During these festivals, priests would interview community members about their recent dreams, looking for specific types of visions that were interpreted as divine communications. These Interviews weren't casual conversations, they were detailed interrogations by trained specialists who were expert in dream interpretation and could supposedly distinguish between genuine divine visions and ordinary psychological dreams. But the selection process was extraordinarily complex and psychologically sophisticated, involving detailed examination of every aspect of reported dreams, including the specific imagery, emotional content, sensory details, and narrative structure that supposedly indicated authentic communication from particular deities. The priests had elaborate classification systems for different types of divine dreams, and they could allegedly determine not only whether a dream was genuinely supernatural, but also which specific god had provided the vision and what type of cosmic function the dreamer would serve through their sacrifice. The really disturbing aspect of this system was that people actually competed to be selected for dream sacrifice, fabricating elaborate dream stories in hopes of being chosen for what they considered the highest honor in Aztec society. Nobles, warriors, and even merchants would sometimes create fictional accounts of prophetic visions, hoping that their invented dreams would be convincing enough to earn them selection for sacrificial death that would guarantee them eternal glory and spiritual elevation. This competition created a bizarre psychological dynamic where people lived in constant tension between hoping for divine dreams that would bring them ultimate honor and fearing the literal death that such dreams would require. Aztec society developed elaborate support systems for people who were struggling with this psychological pressure, including counseling from priests who could help individuals understand their spiritual responsibilities and prepare mentally for potential sacrifice. Selected dreamers would undergo weeks of preparation that included special diets, purification rituals, psychological counseling, and spiritual education designed to prepare them for their role as divine messengers and cosmic intermediaries. They were treated as living gods during this preparation period, receiving the finest food, clothing, and accommodations available in Aztec society, while also participating in elaborate ceremonies that celebrated their spiritual achievement and prepared the community for their sacrificial transformation. The sacrifice ceremonies themselves were elaborate public spectacles that could last for days, with the dreamer serving as the central figure in complex rituals that were believed to transfer their prophetic abilities to the community, ensure continued divine protection, and maintain the cosmic balance that kept the world functioning properly. These ceremonies involved not just the physical death of the dreamer, but also elaborate spiritual procedures for channeling their divine connection into collective benefit for Aztec society. But perhaps the most psychologically complex aspect of the dream lottery was its impact on Aztec attitudes toward sleep prophecy and spiritual responsibility. People became extraordinarily attentive to their dream experiences, developing enhanced dream recall and interpretation skills. Because they understood that their nocturnal visions could literally determine their fate, this created a society where dreaming was taken more seriously than almost any other human activity. The Spanish conquest ended the dream sacrifice lottery, though some Spanish chroniclers reported that the practice continued in secret in remote areas for decades after the fall of the Aztec Empire. The psychological legacy of this system, however, may have persisted much longer, influencing indigenous Mexican attitudes toward dreams, prophecy, and spiritual responsibility in ways that continued to affect cultural practices long after the formal end of Aztec civilization. During the 14th century, at the same time as the Black Death was devastating Europe, there was a simultaneous psychological epidemic that has been almost completely forgotten by mainstream history. The Dream Plague, where thousands of people throughout medieval Europe began having identical nightmares about demonic invasion, leading to mass hysteria, social chaos, and the development of elaborate church rituals designed to combat supernatural dream attacks that seemed to be spreading like a contagious disease through the collective unconscious of European civilization. The Dream Plague began around 1347 in various European cities, with people reporting the same terrifying nightmare about demons entering their bedchambers at night and attempting to steal their souls through their dreams. What made this phenomenon so disturbing was the remarkable consistency of these reports across different regions, social classes, and cultural backgrounds, suggesting either genuine supernatural invasion or some form of collective psychological contagion that operated through shared cultural fears and social communication. The typical dream plague nightmare followed a consistent pattern that was documented by church authorities who initially suspected supernatural causes. Dreamers would report awakening in their beds to find their bedchambers filled with demonic figures performing elaborate rituals designed to capture their souls during sleep. These demons would allegedly mark victims with invisible spiritual brands that could only be seen in dreams, creating a sense of permanent contamination that persisted even after waking. The demons in these dreams were described with remarkable consistency across different accounts. They appeared as humanoid figures with animal characteristics, wore elaborate costumes that combined religious and military elements, and spoken languages that dreamers didn't recognize but somehow understood. The demons would perform complex ceremonies that involved symbolic torture, spiritual dismemberment, and psychological manipulation designed to break down the dreamer's resistance and facilitate soul capture. As reports of identical nightmares spread throughout Europe, entire communities became convinced that they were under coordinated demonic attack through the dream realm. This belief created secondary psychological effects that were often more devastating than the original nightmares. People became afraid to sleep, leading to widespread insomnia, mental breakdown, and social chaos that disrupted normal economic and social activities throughout affected regions. Churches developed special exorcism rituals specifically designed to combat dream demons, including protective prayers that were supposed to be recited before sleep, the blessed objects that could be placed in bedchambers to prevent demonic intrusion, and community ceremonies designed to create spiritual barriers against supernatural dream attacks. These church responses often made the situation worse by validating people's fears and encouraging the belief that demonic invasion was indeed occurring. Medieval physicians attempted to treat the dream plague through various medical interventions, including bloodletting to remove corrupted humors, herbal remedies that were supposed to prevent demonic dreams, and changes in diet that were believed to make sleepers less attractive to supernatural predators. But these treatments were generally ineffective, and the nightmare epidemic continued to spread throughout European populations. Despite medical and religious intervention, the church eventually responded with massive public ceremonies designed to purify entire communities from dream demon influence. These rituals involved thousands of participants and could last for weeks, with continuous prayers, exorcisms, and protective blessings intended to create spiritual fortifications against supernatural assault. The scale and intensity of these community responses demonstrates how seriously medieval Europeans took the threat of collective supernatural attack through dreams. But perhaps the most bizarre aspect of the dream plague was the reported development of dream immunity among people who survived multiple demonic nightmare attacks. These individuals claimed they had learned to recognize and resist demonic manipulation during dreams, and some became professional dream protectors who would sleep alongside vulnerable community members to provide supernatural defense against nightmare invasion. The dream plague gradually subsided in the late 14th century, though isolated outbreaks continued to occur throughout medieval Europe for several more centuries. Modern historians have proposed various explanations for this phenomenon, including mass hysteria related to plague, stress, ergot poisoning from contaminated grain, shared cultural anxieties about death and supernatural punishment, and the psychological effects of extreme social upheaval caused by demographic collapse and economic disruption. But some researchers have suggested that the dream plague might have represented a genuine, collective psychological phenomenon caused by shared traumatic experiences that created similar nightmare patterns across large populations. The consistency and detail of the reported dreams exceed what would normally be expected from simple suggestion or mass hysteria, and the phenomenon demonstrates how psychological experiences can become collective social realities that affect entire civilizations. Contemporary studies of collective trauma and shared psychological experiences have provided new frameworks for understanding how the dream plague might have operated through natural psychological mechanisms rather than supernatural forces. Research on disaster survivors and populations. Experiencing extreme stress has found that shared traumatic experiences can indeed create similar nightmare patterns and psychological symptoms across large groups of people. Whatever its ultimate cause, the medieval dream plague demonstrates how dream experiences can become collective social phenomena that affect entire civilizations and how cultural beliefs about supernatural threats can create real psychological and social consequences that persist for generations. The epidemic shows that the boundary between individual psychology and collective social reality is far more fluid than most people assume, and that shared fears and beliefs can manifest as apparently supernatural experiences that feel completely real to the people who experience them. The legacy of the dream plague continues to influence European folklore, religious practices, and cultural attitudes toward dreams and supernatural threats. Many traditional protective rituals and sleeping customs in European cultures can be traced back to practices that were developed during the 14th century nightmare epidemic, demonstrating how collective psychological experiences can create lasting cultural changes that persist long after the original crisis has passed. When thousands of people across medieval Europe simultaneously experienced identical nightmares about demonic soul theft, creating a psychological epidemic that lasted for decades and required massive religious and medical intervention, you're dealing with collective consciousness. Phenomena that challenge our understanding of individual psychology, social contagion, and the mysterious ways that shared cultural fears can manifest as apparently supernatural experiences that feel more real than ordinary waking life. The medieval dream plague ultimately reminds us that consciousness is not just an individual phenomenon, but also a collective reality that can be influenced by social conditions, cultural beliefs, and shared psychological experiences in ways that we're only beginning to understand through contemporary research into mass psychology, social contagion, and the relationship between individual mental health and collective social well-being. If you're somehow still awake, which I doubt, you've just spent the last 2 hours exploring some of the most bizarre, creative, and honestly disturbing ways that ancient civilizations tried to understand and control the mysterious realm of dreams. From Egyptian temples where people paid to have prophetic dreams, to Norse shamans who literally died and came back to life for better visions, to Romans who prosecuted people for crimes they committed in other people's nightmares. What's absolutely fascinating about all these ancient dream customs is how seriously our ancestors took the connection between sleep and consciousness. They understood something that we're only beginning to rediscover, that dreams aren't just random brain activity, but potential gateways to understanding consciousness, creativity, and maybe even glimpses of realities beyond our normal waking experience. Tonight's stories remind us that the relationship between sleeping and waking consciousness has always been one of humanity's greatest mysteries, and that every culture throughout history has developed their own unique ways of exploring that mystery. Some of their methods were brilliant, some were terrifying, and some were just completely unhinged, but they all reflect our eternal fascination with what happens when we close our eyes and drift into that strange realm we call dreams. I'd love to know where you're listening from tonight and whether your own culture has any unusual dream traditions or beliefs that I didn't cover. Have you ever experienced anything like the collective dreams that so many ancient cultures reported? Do you think there might be more to dreams than modern science currently understands? Drop a comment and let me know about your own dream experiences, especially if you've ever had dreams that felt too real or too meaningful to be just random mental activity. Maybe our ancestors were onto something with all their elaborate dream rituals and ceremonies. And maybe tonight, as you're drifting off to sleep, you'll think about all the generations of humans who have closed their eyes before you, seeking answers, guidance, and understanding through their dreams. Who knows, maybe you'll have some strange dreams of your own. Sweet dreams, everyone. Thanks for joining me on this journey through the weird world of ancient dream customs. See you in your dreams.